Chapter 1: The Oracle of Limansk. The air in the bar tasted of stale cigarettes, cheap vodka, and unwashed bodies. Yuri Kovalenko ignored the taste. He ignored the dull throb in the joint where his flesh met the cold steel of his prosthetic. He focused on the map spread across the sticky table, its surface a web of pencil lines, grease stains, and notations written in a cramped, precise Cyrillic. His finger, thick and calloused, traced a route through a sector marked with a skull and a series of question marks. Pavel Moraz watched him from across the room, leaning against a wall plastered with peeling posters of forgotten rock bands. A smirk played on his lips. He took a slow drag from his cigarette, the cherry glowing like a baleful eye in the gloom. Pavel saw an old man, a relic, clinging to paper in a world of whispers and instinct. He saw a man who thought the zone was a machine to be dismantled, not a god to be appeased. The thought amused him. Pavel flicked his cigarette butt to the floor and pushed himself off the wall, his boots crunching on something unseen. The bar door creaked open, spilling a rectangle of jaundiced light into the room. A figure stood silhouetted against the evening haze, small and wiry. It was Alexei, the middleman, his face a roadmap of anxiety. "She is ready," Alexei said, his voice a low rasp. He avoided looking at either of them directly, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting a blow. "She asked for you, both of you." Yuri folded his map with methodical precision, each crease sharp and deliberate. He slid it into an oilskin pouch and tucked it inside his jacket. His movements were slow, economical. He rose from his chair, the prosthetic leg making a soft hydraulic hiss followed by a solid clunk on the wooden floor. He walked past Pavel without a word, his gaze fixed on the door. Pavel fell into step behind him, the energetic gait of a young wolf trailing an old bear. "An audience with the witch," Pavel murmured, loud enough for Yuri to hear. "She must have a special treat for us today. Maybe she'll read our fortune in a pile of mutated rat entrails." Yuri did not respond. He saved his words, saved his energy. The zone demanded payment for everything, and breath was a currency he refused to spend on a fool. They followed Alexei through the muddy, unpaved streets of the settlement, a wretched collection of shacks and repurposed shipping containers clinging to the zone's edge like rust on a razor blade. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of pine, damp earth, and something else. A faint, metallic tang, the taste of radiation. Oksana's dwelling was a derelict bus, sunk to its axles in the mud. Its windows were covered with scrap metal and tarps. A single bare bulb, powered by a sputtering generator, cast a sickly glow over the entrance. Alexei stopped 20 paces away, wringing his hands. "She waits inside," he stammered. "My part is done. Your payment for the information is half your take, standard fee." "We know the terms, Alexei," Yuri said, his voice a low rumble. He looked at the bus, his expression unreadable. Pavel grinned, a flash of white teeth in the darkness. "Don't worry. If we find the heart, you'll be able to buy a whole new bus, maybe one with wheels." Alexei flinched and scurried away into the shadows, leaving them alone with the generator's cough and the oppressive silence of the nearby zone. Yuri approached the bus first. The door was a sheet of corrugated iron held in place by a twisted coat hanger. He pulled it aside. The stench from within was overpowering, a thick, cloying odor of unwashed linen, herbal concoctions, and ozone. The interior was a cramped tunnel of chaos. Wires snaked across the ceiling, dripping with condensation. Jars filled with murky liquids and unidentifiable specimens lined makeshift shelves. In the center of the space, sitting cross-legged on a pile of rags, was Oksana. She was a crone from a forgotten tale, ancient and ageless at once. Her face was a mask of wrinkles, her hair a white, tangled mess. But her eyes were the true horror. They were gone. In their place were two polished spheres of black obsidian, smooth and perfectly reflective. They mirrored the squalid interior of the bus, showing Yuri and Pavel standing in the doorway, distorted and small. "The cartographer," she hissed, her voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Her head swiveled towards Yuri, though she had no eyes to see him. "You come with your lines and your numbers. You try to draw the face of God with a child's crayon." Her head snapped towards Pavel. "And the gambler. You come with your pretty stones and your gambler's luck. You think you can smile your way into heaven, but you do not know you are already in hell." Pavel's smirk faltered. He took a half-step back, his hand instinctively going to a pouch on his belt where a chunk of irradiated copper pulsed with a faint, reassuring warmth. "We were told you have a location," Yuri said, his tone flat, businesslike. He would not be drawn into her madness. "Something new, something valuable." Oksana cackled, a dry, rattling sound. "Valuable? Oh yes, it is the beginning and the end, the engine of this place, the wound that will not heal." She leaned forward, her obsidian eyes catching the light. "The heart of the zone." A hush fell over the cramped space. The heart was a myth, a stalker's ghost story told over campfires. The supposed source of the zone's power, an artifact of unimaginable energy. Most believed it was a fiction, but Oksana knew things. "Where is it?" Pavel asked, his voice tight. "It is sleeping," Oksana whispered, her head tilting at an unnatural angle. "It slumbers where the concrete sleeps. In the city of ghosts it dreams. The sarcophagus is not its tomb, it is its cradle." Yuri's jaw tightened. Pripyat, the dead city itself, closer to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant than anyone dared to venture for long. The radiation levels were lethal, the anomalies dense and vicious. "Why tell us?" Yuri asked, his suspicion a palpable force. "Why now?" Oksana's lips peeled back from her teeth in a grimace. "A dream told me, a voice on the static, it said two would come. One who trusts the earth and one who trusts the air. One who carries the key and one who carries the lock." Her blank gaze seemed to pass between them. "The heart beats. It is waking. It fears its own reflection. You must take it from its nest before it hatches." She reached a trembling, grimy hand into a wooden box beside her and pulled out a small object. It was a pre-disaster photograph, faded and creased. It showed a smiling family, a man, a woman, and a little girl holding a doll, standing in a nondescript apartment. A potted plant sat on the windowsill behind them. "This is the key," she said, offering the photo to Yuri. "Or the lock, I forget which." Yuri took the photograph. It felt strangely cold. "The apartment number, the building?" he asked. Oksana laughed again, the sound sharp and grating. The zone has eaten the numbers, but the room remembers. Find the room where the flower still blooms. That is where you must go. Pavel stared at the photograph in Yuri's hand. A flower. Nothing has bloomed in Pripyat for 30 years. The zone is a mother, Oksana hissed. She cares for her children. She began to rock back and forth, humming a discordant tune. The audience was over. Yuri put the photograph away. He turned and exited the bus, the cool night air a welcome shock after the suffocating interior. Pavel followed a moment later, his face pale. They stood in silence for a long time, the generators sputtering the only sound. "This is suicide," Yuri said finally, looking not at Pavel but towards the faint, ominous glow on the horizon that marked the zone's center. "The payoff would be legendary," Pavel countered, his bravado returning. "We could retire, leave this shithole for good, live on a beach somewhere, no more running, no more rad sickness. If we survive. We're the best, old man, you with your maps, me with my charm." Pavel lit another cigarette, his hands not quite steady. 50-50 split, straight down the middle. For the heart, it's worth the risk. Yuri considered the proposition. He was not the best. He was the most careful. He had survived this long by avoiding risks like this. But he was old. His leg ached with a phantom pain that never ceased. His savings were meager. One last run. The thought was a familiar poison. He looked at Pavel, at the hunger and ambition in the young man's eyes. He did not trust him. Pavel was a shortcut taker, a believer in luck. In the zone, luck was a predator that fed on fools. But he was fast, his senses were sharp, and he could navigate anomaly fields with an unnerving grace. Yuri's caution and Pavel's instinct. Perhaps the witch was right. 50-50, Yuri confirmed, his voice devoid of emotion. But we do this my way, by the map. No shortcuts, no stupid risks. Pavel blew a smoke ring into the air. Your way to the city gates, old man. Once we're inside Pripyat, we let the zone guide us. It was not an agreement but a truce, a fragile, temporary alignment of greed. Yuri gave a short, sharp nod. He turned and walked towards his shack to prepare. The journey would be long. He needed to clean his rifle, check the seals on his suit, and calibrate his Geiger counter. Pavel watched him go, then looked down at his own hands. The witch had said one carried the key, the other the lock. He wondered which one he was. He took a final, deep drag from his cigarette and flicked it into a puddle. The ember died with a faint hiss. Tonight they would rest. Tomorrow they would walk into hell. Chapter 2. Anomaly Fields. The perimeter fence was a skeletal ruin, its chain links eaten by rust, its concrete posts crumbling. Warning signs, faded to ghost white, still depicted the stark, universal symbol for radiation. They offered no caution about the things that were truly dangerous here. Yuri snipped the last strand of sagging, barbed wire with a pair of heavy cutters. The snap of the metal was loud in the pre-dawn quiet. They were in. An unnatural stillness descended as they moved away from the fence. The birdsong ceased. The wind died. The world seemed to be holding its breath. Yuri's Geiger counter began to speak, its steady, rhythmic clicking a third heartbeat beside his own and Pavel's. Click, 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 click. It was the zone's welcome. Background radiation is nominal for this sector, Yuri stated, his eyes scanning the terrain. They were in a stretch of sparse woodland, the trees thin and sickly. We follow this ridge for 2 kilometers, then cut east towards the old service road. Pavel did not answer. He was sniffing the air, his head tilted. He held a small, smooth river stone in his palm. It was one of his talismans, an artifact he called a pebble. He claimed it grew warm in the presence of gravitational anomalies. "The air is heavy here," Pavel said. "Something's wrong. The map says this path is clear." The map shows the path with the lowest probability of anomaly formation. It is not a guarantee of safety, Yuri replied, not breaking his stride. His prosthetic leg crunched rhythmically on the dry leaves and twigs. It is a calculation of risk, the safest one. Sometimes the safest path is a trap. Pavel stopped. He closed his eyes. The pebble in his hand was inert. "We should go through the gully to the left. It feels cleaner." Yuri halted and turned, his face a stern mask. The gully is a geographical funnel. It is a prime location for burner anomalies after rainfall. The readings are higher. We stick to the plan. "Your plan is old, Yuri. The zone changes, it breathes." Pavel opened his eyes, a flicker of frustration in them. "My gut tells me the ridge is wrong." "Your gut is an unreliable organ addled by cheap vodka," Yuri retorted. He gestured with his rifle. "We move, now." He turned and continued walking, the steady clunkiss of his leg a declaration of his resolve. Pavel swore under his breath but followed. For an hour they walked in tense silence, broken only by the counter's clicks and the sound of their own breathing through their respirators. The woods grew denser. Strange, pale fungi clung to the bark of trees, glowing with a faint, sickly luminescence. Yuri was checking his PDA, comparing the GPS coordinates with his paper map, when Pavel suddenly grabbed his arm. "Stop," Pavel whispered. Yuri froze. He scanned the area ahead. He saw nothing. A small clearing littered with fallen leaves. A rusted, overturned truck chassis half swallowed by the earth. "What is it?" Yuri asked, his voice low. "The air, it shimmers," Pavel pointed. "There, to the right of the truck." Yuri squinted. He saw it now. A subtle distortion like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. It was a patch of air about 3 meters across, perfectly clear but somehow wrong. His Geiger counter gave no warning. His anomaly detector was silent. "It's a vortex," Yuri identified it, "a gravitational anomaly. Deadly. His maps had not shown one here, it must be new. We go around, wide berth." As he began to step back, his prosthetic foot caught on an exposed root. He stumbled, his balance compromised. He windmilled his arms, a grunt of exertion escaping his lips as he fought to stay upright. His rifle slipped from his grasp and flew forward, end over end. It sailed directly into the shimmering patch of air. There was no sound. The rifle simply vanished. One moment it was there, a solid object of wood and steel. The next it was gone. Yuri regained his balance, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stared at the spot where his weapon had disappeared. "Pavel, throw a bolt," he commanded, his voice tight. Pavel pulled a heavy steel bolt from his belt pouch and tossed it underhand into the anomaly. It, too, disappeared without a trace. He threw another, aiming higher. It vanished. He threw a third, aiming at the ground in the center of the shimmer. This one did not vanish. The instant it crossed the invisible threshold, it was violently, impossibly crushed into a sphere of metal the size of a marble. It dropped to the ground with a soft thud. Yuri stared at the compressed ball of steel. A gravity knot, far worse than a vortex. A mobile, invisible point of extreme gravity. He had been a single step away from having his leg, his entire body, crushed into a dense pellet of matter. Pavel had saved his life. "The gully is looking better now, old man," Pavel asked, his voice shaking slightly. The bravado was a thin veneer over a layer of cold fear. Yuri did not acknowledge the comment. He took a deep, steadying breath. "Thank you." The words were clipped, forced. "My rifle is gone." "You can have my spare pistol," Pavel offered. He unholstered a Makarov from his hip and held it out. "I prefer my shotgun anyway." Yuri took the pistol, the weight of it unfamiliar in his hand. He checked the magazine, full. He gave Pavel a curt nod. "Let us try your gully." They backtracked and descended into the narrow ravine Pavel had indicated. The air here was damp, the ground soft and muddy. Yuri's counter clicked a little faster, the radiation noticeably higher, but he said nothing. For now, the gambler's luck had held. They found the service road an hour later. It was a broken spine of asphalt, cracked and overgrown with weeds. Following it was easier than trekking through the woods. They made good time, moving under the gray, overcast sky. The tension between them had eased, replaced by a shared, unspoken awareness of their near-fatal encounter. As dusk began to settle, tinting the world in shades of purple and gray, they found a place to make camp. A derelict gas station, its pumps rusted skeletons, its windows shattered. "We'll take shelter in the office," Yuri decided. "The concrete walls will offer some protection." While Yuri set up perimeter alarms, a series of tripwires connected to empty cans, Pavel explored the garage. He returned a few minutes later, his face grim. "Yuri, you should see this." Yuri followed him into the garage's service pit. Lying at the bottom was a body. It was a stalker dressed in a worn-out sunrise suit. His gear was scattered around him. His face was a mask of terror, his eyes wide, his mouth open in a silent scream. There were no wounds on him. "No blood," Pavel observed. "No signs of a mutant attack. His gear is all here. Nobody looted him." Yuri knelt, his bad leg extended stiffly. He scanned the body with his anomaly detector. Nothing. He checked for radiation. The levels were normal for the area. What killed him? Pavel wondered aloud. Yuri noticed something clutched in the dead man's hand. He carefully pried the stiff fingers open. It was a PDA, its screen cracked. Yuri pressed the power button. Miraculously, it flickered to life, its battery almost drained. The screen showed a single, corrupted audio file. The file's name was a string of random characters. Yuri tapped play. A burst of static erupted from the PDA's tiny speaker. Then a voice. It was a man, whispering, frantic. Not real, it's not him. He didn't touch my rations. I saw him. No, I didn't. He says it's the zone, the radiation sickness, but his eyes are wrong. He's not my partner anymore. He's wearing my partner's face. I have to get away. I have to. The audio cut out, replaced by a final, horrifying shriek of pure terror, then silence. The PDA's battery died. Yuri and Pavel looked at each other in the growing darkness of the service pit. The dead stalker was not alone. He had been here with a partner. A cold knot formed in Yuri's stomach. He looked at the body again, then at the empty garage around them. The partner was gone. Suddenly, a thought, cold and sharp, pierced Yuri's mind. It felt alien, an intrusion. Pavel saved you at the anomaly, but what if he knew it was there? What if he led you to its edge, hoping you would fall? He wanted your gear. He wants the whole prize for himself. Yuri blinked, shaking his head slightly. The thought was absurd. Madness. The zone played tricks on the mind. He pushed the thought away, but a splinter of it remained, lodged deep in his consciousness. "We should get inside," Yuri said, his voice harder than he intended. "Barricade the door. We'll take watches." Pavel nodded, his eyes still fixed on the dead man. He looked unsettled, his usual confidence gone. As he turned to leave the pit, Yuri saw him touch the pebble talisman at his belt, as if for reassurance. But Yuri's newly suspicious mind saw it differently. He saw a man checking a tool, a man with secrets. They sealed themselves in the small office, the silence between them now heavy with something new. It was not just tension. It was the ghost of the dead stalker's last words. It was suspicion. The zone had claimed its first victim of their partnership, not with teeth or radiation, but with a simple, poisonous idea. Chapter 3: The Concrete Sleepers. Pripyat rose from the plains like a city from a nightmare. Its concrete apartment blocks were brutalist tombstones under the perpetually gray sky. The iconic Ferris wheel stood silent in the distance, a skeletal sentinel guarding a playground for ghosts. The only sound was the wind, a low, mournful sigh that swept through shattered window panes. Yuri and Pavel moved through the deserted streets, their boots crunching on a carpet of broken glass and desiccated leaves. They stuck to the shadows, flitting from one concrete shell to another. The city was a labyrinth, and every corner promised either sanctuary or a swift, anonymous death. Yuri's Geiger counter clicked with a more insistent, nervous rhythm here, a constant reminder of the invisible poison saturating the very air they breathed. "We need to find shelter before nightfall," Yuri stated, scanning the facade of a towering 16-story apartment building. Its face was a patchwork of gaping black windows. "The mutants are more active in the dark. That one looks defensible, top floor. One way in or out." Pavel grunted his assent, his eyes restlessly scanning the rooftops. He had been quiet since they left the gas station, the dead stalker's final words hanging between them like a shroud. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by a tense, wary vigilance. He kept his distance from Yuri, a few extra paces of separation that felt like a chasm. They entered the building's lobby. The air was thick with the dust of decay and the faint, sweet smell of rot. A child's tricycle lay on its side, one wheel spinning slowly in a draft. They took the stairs. The climb was arduous, a slow, spiraling ascent into darkness. Yuri's prosthetic made every step a loud, mechanical effort, a sound that seemed to mock the tomb-like silence of the building. On the 10th floor, Pavel held up a hand, motioning for a halt. "Listen." Yuri stopped, straining his ears. At first he heard nothing but the wind. Then he caught it. A faint, rhythmic sound from one of the apartments down the hall. A soft, wet, scraping noise. Scrape, pause, scrape. They drew their weapons. Yuri held the Makarov pistol, its unfamiliar grip slick in his sweating palm. Pavel hefted his shotgun, the double barrels looking like two black, empty eyes. They moved down the hallway, stepping carefully over debris. The sound was coming from behind apartment 10B. Its door was slightly ajar. Pavel kicked the door open. It swung inward with a protesting groan. They burst into the room, weapons raised. The apartment was a time capsule. A table was set for a meal that was never eaten. A television with a shattered screen sat in the corner, but the source of the sound was on the far wall. A large patch of reddish-brown mold, pulsating with a slow, steady rhythm, was growing over the wallpaper. As they watched, a pseudopod of mold extended, scraping against the plaster, then retracted. It was alive. Red tallow. Yuri identified the anomaly, his voice a low whisper. It was a psychoreactive organism. Benign, unless you got too close. He had seen it mold itself into the shape of a man's dead wife once, luring him to his doom. Suddenly, the tallow began to shift. It quivered, its surface bubbling. It was reacting to their presence, to their thoughts. It began to form a shape. It was the face of the dead stalker from the gas station, his mouth open in that final, silent scream. Pavel let out a choked gasp and took an involuntary step back. The face dissolved back into the shapeless mass. "It feeds on fear," Yuri said, his voice strained. "Don't give it anything, we're leaving." They backed out of the apartment, pulling the door shut. The scraping sound continued from within, a hungry, persistent noise. They reached the top floor without further incident and found an apartment that suited their needs. Its door was solid, and the balcony offered a commanding view of the street below. While Pavel barricaded the entrance with a heavy sofa, Yuri took out the photograph Oksana had given them. He studied the smiling family. The room in the picture was generic, anonymous. It could be any one of the thousands of abandoned apartments in this dead city. His eyes settled on the plant on the windowsill, a simple houseplant with broad, green leaves. "A flower that still blooms," Yuri muttered to himself, looking out the window at the desolate concrete landscape. It was impossible, a madwoman's riddle. Pavel finished with the barricade and slumped against the wall, pulling out a flask. He took a long swallow of vodka. "Find anything?" he asked, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Nothing," Yuri said, putting the photo away. He pulled the corrupted PDA from his pouch, the dead man's device. "The answer might be in here, if I can bypass the encryption." He sat on the floor, cross-legged, and connected the PDA to his own with a cable. His fingers began to move across the screen of his device, inputting lines of code. It was a slow, painstaking process. Pavel watched him, his eyes narrowed. "You think that's a good idea, After what we heard, that thing could have a virus, some kind of zone-borne malware. It is a risk I am willing to take, Yuri replied without looking up. We have no other leads, unless your gut has another bright idea for us. The sarcasm was a sharp edge in his voice. My gut got us past that knot, Pavel shot back. Your map almost got us pulped. My map is based on 30 years of data. Your gut is based on last night's vodka. The argument was sharp, ugly. A sudden flare of anger that seemed disproportionate to the situation. A wave of pure, undiluted rage washed over Yuri. He wanted to smash the PDA into the wall. He wanted to put a bullet in the smug face of the man across the room. The intensity of the feeling shocked him. He gripped his PDA, his knuckles white, and forced the feeling down. He took a deep, shuddering breath. It was the zone. It had to be the zone. The synaptic mimic. It was seeding these thoughts, amplifying their friction. He did not look at Pavel. He focused on the screen, on the lines of code. I am trying to save our lives. Be quiet. Pavel fell silent, but the air remained thick with hostility. They sat for hours in the dying light, two islands of simmering resentment. Yuri worked on the PDA while Pavel cleaned his shotgun with meticulous, angry movements. Night fell, a deep, starless dark that swallowed the city whole. Strange sounds drifted up from the streets below, the chittering of unseen things, a distant, mournful howl. Suddenly, Yuri's PDA beeped. A single line of text appeared on the screen, decryption complete. I'm in, Yuri said, his voice tired but triumphant. Pavel moved closer, his anger momentarily forgotten. The PDA's screen was filled with files, logs, maps, personal notes. Yuri opened the most recent entry, a text file dated 2 days prior. Log entry 47. Something is wrong with Anton. He's been acting strange since we passed the Red Forest. Paranoid. Accused me of tampering with his water purifier. Said I was trying to poison him. I think the psychic emissions are getting to him. He keeps talking about his family, about getting back to his daughter. He's becoming a liability. I had to sedate him last night. I will take his share. He is too weak for the zone. Yuri froze. He read the last line again. I will take his share. The voice on the audio file belonged to Anton. This log belonged to his partner, the partner who killed him. A cold dread washed over him. He thought of his own broken water purifier back at the gas station. A simple mechanical failure, he had told himself. But what if it was? He looked up at Pavel. The younger man was reading the screen over his shoulder, his face illuminated by the PDA's glow. His expression was one of dawning horror. So the partner, Pavel began. The partner killed him, Yuri finished, his voice a dead monotone. He watched Pavel's face carefully. Was that horror on his face, or was it the cunning of a predator caught in the light? The synaptic mimic, a voice in his head, whispered, "It's not him. It's the zone making you think this." But the doubt was a living thing now, squirming in his gut. Yuri, Pavel said, his voice low, my water purifier, it's broken, the filter is cracked. I discovered it this morning, I thought maybe you. He trailed off, but the accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Yuri stared at him, both their purifiers, sabotaged. One of them was lying, or both of them were being played. The dead stalkers, the broken equipment, the escalating paranoia. It was a pattern, a trap. "I did not touch your equipment, Pavel," Yuri said, his voice dangerously calm. He slowly placed the PDA on the floor and reached for the Makarov pistol beside him. "I did not touch yours," Pavel countered, his hand moving to the grip of his shotgun. They stared at each other across the small, dark room. The barricaded door, which was meant to keep the monsters of the zone out, now served to trap the two of them inside. The real monster was not in the streets below. It was right here. It was the suspicion in Yuri's eyes. It was the fear in Pavel's. The zone had peeled back their humanity and exposed the raw, ugly paranoia beneath. And it was just beginning to feed. Chapter 4: The Glass Hounds. The shotgun in Pavel's hands felt like an anchor, the only solid thing in a world that had turned to smoke. The Makarov in Yuri's grip was steady, its black muzzle pointed not at Pavel's chest but at the floor between them. It was not a threat. It was a statement, a line drawn in the dust. "One of us is compromised," Yuri said, his voice a low, hard thing in the suffocating quiet. "Or the zone is trying to make us believe that. It makes no difference. The result is the same." "So what now?" Pavel asked, his knuckles white on the stock of his weapon. "We shoot each other. Let the mutants clean up what's left." "No," Yuri said, his eyes cold and analytical. "We establish a protocol. From now on, we do not share supplies. Your water is your own. My food is my own. We purify our own water in sight of the other. We check our own gear. We trust nothing." "Trust no one, you mean," Pavel corrected, a bitter twist to his lips. "That is the protocol," Yuri confirmed. He gestured with the pistol towards the far corner of the room. "That is your space. This is mine. We sleep in shifts. The man on watch does not approach the sleeping man. Any deviation from this and I will shoot." It was a cold, brutal logic, a prisoner's pact. It was the only way they could coexist without killing each other. Pavel gave a slow, deliberate nod. He lowered the shotgun, the barrels pointing at the floor, and moved to his designated corner. He sat down, leaning his back against the cold concrete wall, the weapon resting across his lap. The truce was set. The first watch was Yuri's. He sat near the barricaded door, the Makarov resting on his knee, his back to the wall. He watched Pavel, a dark shape in the opposite corner, occasionally illuminated by the faint, eerie glow of the anomalous fungi outside. Pavel appeared to be asleep, his breathing deep and even. But Yuri did not relax. Sleep in the zone was a luxury, and tonight it was unaffordable. He took out the dead Stalker's PDA again, its screen casting a pale light on his grim face. He began to sift through the other files, searching for anything that could give them an advantage. He found corrupted maps, lists of artifact prices from a dealer in the settlement, and a series of personal audio logs. He played one. It was the voice of Anton, the man from the final, frantic message. But this log was from weeks earlier. His tone was lighter, full of a stalker's rough optimism. "Found a sparkler artifact near the Jupiter plant. Good specimen. Clean. Should fetch enough for a new suit and a month's supply of Masha's favorite chocolates. She worries. I tell her not to. I tell her I am careful. I know the zone, I know its tricks. I will always come home to her. This place, it can't take me." Yuri switched it off. The man's confidence was a ghost mocking him from the small device. He thought of the photo in his own pocket, the smiling family. The zone took everyone eventually. It was just a matter of how. A sound from outside jolted him from his thoughts. It was not the wind. It was a faint, sharp scrape, the sound of claw on concrete. Yuri was instantly alert. He moved to the window, peering over the sill into the street below. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, but the ambient glow from the city's anomalies gave the world a spectral, monochrome quality. At first, he saw nothing. Then, a flicker of movement. Something emerged from the shadow of a burned-out bus. It was canine in shape, but it moved with an unnatural fluidity. It was followed by another and then a third. They were sleek, emaciated things, their bodies shimmering under the faint light. Glass hounds. Yuri had only heard stories. Dogs left behind during the evacuation, their descendants warped by a specific, bizarre anomaly. Their skin and flesh were supposedly rendered transparent. He saw now the stories were true. He could see their skeletons through their shimmering forms, their internal organs pumping with a dark, viscous fluid. They moved in absolute, terrifying silence. He watched as the pack fanned out, their heads low to the ground. They were hunting. They stopped directly below the building. One of them lifted its head, its translucent skull pointing directly at their window. It did not have eyes, only dark sockets, but Yuri felt its gaze lock onto him. It knew they were here. "Pavel," Yuri hissed. "Wake up, we have company." Pavel was awake instantly, the shotgun in his hands. He joined Yuri at the window. When he saw the creatures below, a string of curses escaped his lips. "How did they find us?" Pavel whispered. "Scent, sound, or they just knew," Yuri replied. He looked at the barricaded door. It would not hold them for long. "They will find a way in. We cannot stay here." A new sound reached them, a rhythmic thudding from the floor below. They were inside the building, climbing the stairs. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm Yuri. He fought it down, his mind racing, calculating angles, escape routes, probabilities. "The balcony," he said. "It is our only way out." He moved to the balcony door. It was rusted shut. He put his shoulder to it and pushed. It refused to budge. "Together," he grunted. Pavel joined him. They slammed their combined weight against the door. The metal groaned. On the third push, the lock shattered and the door flew open, revealing the dizzying drop to the street 16 stories below. The wind howled around them, cold and sharp. The thudding from the stairwell was louder now, closer. It was accompanied by the sound of splintering wood. The hounds were on their floor, tearing at the apartment doors. Yuri scanned the building's facade. The balconies were arranged in a staggered pattern. The one directly below them was 2 meters down and 1 meter to the left. A dangerous jump, but a possible one. "We jump," Yuri said. "From balcony to balcony, it is the only way down." Pavel looked at the drop, then back at the door, which was now shuddering in its frame. "You're insane. Your leg." "There is no choice," Yuri snapped. He uncoiled a thin, strong rope from his pack. He looped it around the thick concrete railing of the balcony, securing it with a knot he could tie in his sleep. "I will go first. I will anchor the rope. You will follow. Move." The apartment door splintered, a translucent snout forcing its way through the crack. There was no time to argue. Yuri swung his good leg over the railing. For a moment he hung over the abyss, the wind threatening to tear him from his perch. He looked down, gauged the distance, and let go. He fell, the rope burning his hands. He hit the railing of the lower balcony with a jarring impact that sent a shockwave of pain up his entire body. His prosthetic leg scraped against the concrete, the sound a shriek of tortured metal. He held on, his muscles screaming, and hauled himself over the railing onto the relative safety of the concrete slab. "Pavel," he yelled, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind. Pavel was already climbing over the railing above. He was younger, more agile. He jumped, landing with a cat-like grace on the railing and vaulting over it. He landed beside Yuri as the first of the Glass Hounds burst onto the balcony they had just vacated. It launched itself into the void after them. It fell short, its silent, twisting form plummeting to the street below. They did not wait to watch it hit. They repeated the process, a terrifying vertical descent down the face of the dead building. Balcony to balcony, floor by floor. Yuri's body screamed in protest. The pain in his stump was a white-hot fire. Pavel moved with a fluid, desperate speed, his fear fueling his adrenaline. They were on the 5th floor when they saw it. In the apartment building across the street on a high floor, a single window was not dark. It was illuminated by a soft, green glow. And in that window, silhouetted against the light, was a plant. A large houseplant, its leaves lush and impossibly green. It looked healthy. It looked alive. "Yuri, look," Pavel panted, pointing. Yuri saw it, a flower that still blooms, Oksana's riddle, a surge of something, hope, or maybe just a renewed sense of purpose, cut through his pain and exhaustion. He memorized the building, the floor, the window's location. A scraping sound from above broke the spell. A hound was descending directly above them, its claws finding purchase in the cracks of the concrete. "Go!" Yuri yelled. They scrambled, their descent becoming more frantic, more reckless. They reached the 2nd floor and realized they could go no further. The last drop was too great, nearly 10 meters to the unforgiving pavement. They were trapped. The hound was on the 3rd floor balcony now, gathering itself to pounce. Below them, the rest of the pack had gathered, their translucent heads tilted up, their empty sockets tracking their prey. "The drain pipe," Pavel said, pointing to a thick, rusted pipe running down the corner of the building. It was their only chance. Pavel went first, sliding down the pipe, his boots and hands fighting for purchase on the corroded metal. Yuri followed, his prosthetic a clumsy, uncooping liability. He slid more than climbed, the pipe tearing at his clothes and skin. He dropped the last few meters, landing hard. His bad leg buckled under him, and he collapsed onto the pavement, a cry of pain escaping his lips. Pavel was already on his feet, his shotgun leveled at the hound now clambering down the pipe after them. He fired. The blast was deafening in the enclosed street. The shot tore through the creature's shimmering body, shattering its spine. It fell, a heap of transparent flesh and splintered bone. The rest of the pack surged forward. "Run!" Pavel screamed, grabbing Yuri's arm and hauling him to his feet. They ran. They fled into the labyrinth of Pripyat streets, the silent, relentless shapes of the Glass Hounds flowing through the darkness behind them. They did not look back. They ran for their lives, guided only by the image burned into their minds. A single, impossible flower blooming in a window in the heart of the dead city. Chapter 5: The Chrono Stain. Dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in bruised shades of purple and gray. The light offered no warmth, only a clearer view of the desolation. Yuri and Pavel found refuge in the gutted shell of a grocery store, its aisles choked with debris and 30 years of filth. They had lost the Glass Hounds in the maze of residential courtyards, their desperate flight ending here, in this pocket of relative safety. They sat on opposite sides of the store, the space between them a no-man's land of shattered shelves and rusted shopping carts. Exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing down on them, but sleep was a distant memory. Yuri was tending to his leg. He had removed the prosthetic, revealing the scarred, angry stump beneath. He cleaned a long, deep gash along the metal socket with a rag and a splash of antiseptic from his medkit. The pain was a constant, dull fire. Pavel watched him. He said nothing. He methodically broke down his shotgun, cleaning each part with an oiled cloth. The rhythmic click-clack of metal on metal was the only sound. The shared terror of the chase had forged a temporary bond, a purely functional partnership. Now, in the quiet light of day, the suspicion returned, seeping back into the silence between them. Yuri finished his work and reattached the prosthetic, his face a grimace of pain. He pulled out a piece of dried meat and began to chew on it, his eyes fixed on the building they had seen last night. It was visible from the store's shattered entrance, a concrete monolith identical to a dozen others, distinguishable only by the memory of that single, glowing window. "That is our objective," Yuri said, his voice a hoarse rasp. "We move as soon as the light is full." Pavel nodded, reassembling his shotgun with practiced efficiency. "What do you think we will find there?" "The next step of the puzzle," Yuri replied. He did not want to offer any more than that. Sharing theories felt like a weakness, an exposure he could not afford. An hour later they moved out. The streets of Pripyat were quieter by day, but no less menacing. The silence was watchful. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. Every shadow seemed to move in the corner of their vision. They moved with a new caution, a new respect for the city's predators. Their path took them towards the city's central square. As they approached a wide, open boulevard, Yuri held up a hand. "Hold," he said. Pavel stopped, instantly wary. "What is it, mutants?" "Worse." Yuri pointed towards the center of the boulevard. The air was clear. There was nothing there. "My detector is picking up a temporal anomaly, a big one. We go around." "Around will take us through the school. That place is a nest of lurkers," Pavel countered. "How bad is it?" "It is a chrono stain," Yuri said, his face grim. "A traumatic event looped in time. It is not physically dangerous, but—" he trailed off, the unspoken warning clear. It was dangerous to the mind. Pavel considered their options: a known nest of fast, dog-sized mutants or a ghost story. He shrugged. I will take my chances with the ghost. We cross, but we are fast. Yuri's jaw tightened in disapproval, but he knew Pavel was right. The school was a death trap. Stay close. Do not stop for any reason, and do not listen. They stepped onto the boulevard. For the first 10 paces, nothing happened. The world was silent still. Then the sound hit them. It was faint at first, then grew in volume until it was all around them, a phantom cacophony that had no source. It was the sound of a city in its death throes. The air filled with the panicked shouts of people in Russian, the screech of car tires, the wail of distant sirens. A child was crying somewhere nearby, a heartbreaking, repetitive sob. The sounds were layered, overlapping, creating a disorienting wall of noise. Yuri focused on the far side of the street, his eyes fixed on a burned-out car. He walked forward, his pace steady, his face a stony mask. He was trying to block it out, to treat it as meaningless background noise. Pavel was not so disciplined. He flinched as the sound of a woman screaming for her son erupted directly beside him. He spun around, shotgun raised, but there was nothing there. The voice was a ghost on the air. As they reached the center of the boulevard, the visual aspect of the anomaly began. Phantoms flickered at the edge of their vision. Transparent figures of men, women, and children ran past them, their faces masks of terror. A Soviet-era fire truck, shimmering and translucent, raced down the street and passed directly through them, its siren a silent, ghostly wail. Pavel stumbled back, a curse on his lips, even though he felt nothing. Yuri grabbed his arm. Keep moving, do not look at them. But it was impossible not to look. They were in the middle of the evacuation of Pripyat, a moment of history replaying itself for an audience of two. A phantom soldier was trying to herd a group of dazed-looking civilians onto a bus that was not there. A little girl, no older than 7, stood alone in the middle of the street, clutching a doll. She looked directly at Yuri, her eyes wide with a sorrow that transcended time. For a heartbeat, Yuri was frozen. The girl looked so much like his own daughter, a memory from a life lived 30 years ago, before the zone, before everything was lost. The image was a physical blow, a punch to his gut. It's not real, he told himself, forcing his legs to move. It's an echo, a stain on time. They were almost across when a new sound cut through the chaos. A low, deafening roar that shook the very air. It was the sound of the reactor exploding. A wave of invisible pressure washed over them, and the phantom figures on the street all looked up at the sky in unison, their faces illuminated by a brief, ghostly flash of actinic blue light. Then they dissolved, their screams fading into the wind. Silence returned, abrupt, total, and profound. Yuri and Pavel stood on the far side of the boulevard, gasping for breath. The experience had lasted less than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. Pavel was leaning against a wall, his face pale and beaded with sweat. Yuri felt a tremor in his own hands and clenched them into fists. "Now you see," Yuri said, his voice rough, "why we stick to the map." Pavel did not answer. He just nodded, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. The mutants, the anomalies, Those were threats you could fight or run from. This was different. This had been an assault on the soul. They reached the target building 10 minutes later. It was a standard 16-story residential block, indistinguishable from the one they had fled the night before. An aura of profound stillness hung over the place. Yuri's Geiger counter, which had been clicking nervously all morning, fell silent. "The radiation levels are 0, Yuri said, frowning at his device. "That is not possible, not here." Pavel's pebble talisman was cold in his hand. "No gravity anomalies either. The place feels clean." He looked up at the building. "Too clean." They entered the lobby. The air was cool and still. There was no dust. The floor was clean. A potted plant, a ficus, sat near the mailboxes, its leaves green and healthy. It was as if the building had been frozen in time on the day of the evacuation. "What is this place?" Pavel whispered. "The concrete sleepers," Yuri answered, his voice low with a kind of reverence and dread. He had heard the legends. An entire building perfectly preserved. The anomaly here, it projects a field of stasis, of normalcy. Do not be deceived. It is a trap like any other. They took the stairs. The silence in the stairwell was absolute. On each floor they passed apartment doors, all of them closed. A faint sound of music came from one, a muffled argument from another, the sounds of life, but there was no one there. They reached the 15th floor and stopped. The door to apartment 154 was slightly ajar. A soft, green light spilled into the hallway. They approached with caution, weapons ready. Pavel pushed the door open. The apartment inside was pristine. The furniture was covered in plastic sheets as if the owners had just moved in. The air smelled of fresh paint and ozone. And on the windowsill, in a simple ceramic pot, was a flowering plant. A single, perfect, blood-red rose, its petals open in full bloom, glowing with that same impossible green light. It was real. They had found it. Yuri stepped into the room, his boots making no sound on the polished floor. He scanned the apartment. It matched the photograph perfectly. The furniture, the layout, the view from the window. On the wall, above a small sofa, hung a framed picture. It was the same family from Oksana's photo. The smiling man, the woman, the little girl with her doll. Pavel moved towards the flower, his hand outstretched as if to touch it. "No," Yuri commanded. "Do not touch anything." His eyes were drawn to the bedroom door. It was closed. He felt a sudden, inexplicable dread, the feeling of being watched. He slowly raised the Makarov. "We are not alone," he whispered. Pavel froze, his gaze snapping from the flower to the bedroom door. The silence of the apartment pressed in on them. It was not the silence of an empty place. It was the silence of a place that was waiting. Yuri took a step towards the bedroom. He reached out with his free hand, his fingers closing around the cold, brass doorknob. He took a breath, steeling himself for whatever lay beyond. He turned the knob. Chapter 6: The Doll in the Cradle. The click of the doorknob turning was unnaturally loud in the silent apartment. Yuri pushed the door inward. It swung open without a sound. He raised the pistol, stepping over the threshold into the bedroom. Pavel was right behind him. the twin muzzles of his shotgun sweeping the room. The bedroom was as immaculate as the rest of the apartment, a neatly made bed, a wooden wardrobe against the far wall, a small child's desk in the corner. There was no monster. There was no one here at all. Then Yuri saw the bed. A man and a woman lay side by side on top of the covers, fully dressed in the simple, functional clothing of the late Soviet era. They were holding hands. Their eyes were closed, their faces peaceful as if they were merely sleeping. Their skin was pale but not decayed. They were perfectly preserved. The concrete sleepers, the couple from the photograph. Pavel let out a slow, shaky breath. They're asleep. In a manner of speaking, Yuri said, his voice a low murmur. He approached the bed, his curiosity warring with a deep-seated instinct to flee. The stasis field in this apartment was incredibly strong. It was the source of the preservation, the engine of this impossible place. He looked at the peaceful faces of the couple. They had simply lain down and let the zone take them, preserving them in their final moments together. His gaze shifted to a small wooden cradle at the foot of the bed. It was empty, save for a single object lying on the thin mattress. A doll. It was a simple, handmade thing of cloth and yarn, with button eyes and a crudely stitched smile. It was the same doll the little girl was holding in the photograph. Yuri felt a jolt of recognition. The key and the lock, Oksana's words. He looked at the blooming flower in the other room, then back at the doll. The flower was the beacon. This was the objective. He reached into the cradle and picked up the doll. It was surprisingly heavy and cold to the touch, like a stone. As his fingers closed around its cloth body, a wave of dizziness washed over him. A sudden, intense image flashed through his mind. The little girl from the chrono stain, her sad eyes looking directly at him. He grunted, shaking his head to clear it. "What is it?" Pavel asked, his voice sharp with alarm. "Nothing," Yuri lied, tucking the doll into a pouch on his belt. "A psychic echo. We have what we came for. Let us go." But Pavel was not looking at him. He was staring at the wardrobe on the far side of the room. Its mirrored door reflected the bedroom, showing the two stalkers, the bed with its sleeping occupants, the empty cradle. "Yuri," Pavel said, his voice barely a whisper. "My reflection. It just blinked." Yuri turned to look. He saw their reflections, perfectly normal. Pavel was staring at the mirror, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. "I saw it. It blinked, but I didn't." "It is the anomaly," Yuri said, his voice firm, trying to ground them both in reality. "The stasis field is strong here. It plays tricks on the mind. We are leaving. Now." He turned to exit the bedroom, but as he did, something happened. The moment the doll crossed the threshold of the bedroom door, the soft, green glow from the flower in the living room flickered and died. Plunged into the dim, gray light of the Pripyat day, the apartment transformed. The illusion shattered. A thick layer of dust instantly coated every surface. The pristine wallpaper peeled away from the walls in long, leprous strips. The air filled with the stench of mold and decay. The flower on the windowsill wilted in a matter of seconds, its blood-red petals turning black and crumbling into dust. In the bedroom, the transformation was even more horrific. The couple on the bed decayed before their eyes. Their skin tightened, blackened, and split, their bodies sinking into the mattress as 30 years of decomposition occurred in a horrifying, accelerated instant. Within seconds, they were little more than skeletons draped in rotten rags. Pavel cried out in shock, stumbling backward out of the room. The stasis field, anchored somehow to the doll, was gone. The apartment was now just another tomb. Yuri felt the change as well. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the normal sounds of a derelict building, the groaning of pipes, the whisper of the wind, and something else, a new sound, a low, collective moan that seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the apartments all around them. The sleepers were waking up. "We disturbed them," Pavel said, his voice trembling as he reloaded his shotgun with fumbling hands. "We broke their dream." The moaning grew louder, joined by a scratching sound, the sound of fingernails on the other side of their apartment door. Then a soft, rhythmic thudding began against the door, and another against the wall. They were surrounded. "The doll," Yuri said, his mind racing. He pulled it from his pouch. It felt different now, lighter, warmer. He squeezed its cloth body and felt something hard and flat inside, a lump in its torso. He pulled a knife from his belt and sliced the doll's stitched seam. He reached inside and pulled out the object. It was a small, rectangular piece of metal, a dog tag from a child's playset. Stamped into its surface were a series of numbers and a crudely scratched drawing. It was a map, a simple floor plan of a building, with a single room marked with an X. Yuri recognized the layout instantly. It was the Pripyat hospital. The thudding on the door grew more insistent. A crack appeared in the plaster of the wall next to Pavel, as if something was punching it from the other side. "We are trapped," Pavel said, aiming his shotgun at the shuddering door. "What do we do?" Yuri looked at the crude map, then at the window. They were 15 stories up. There was no escape that way. The only way out was through the hallway, through them. "They are not mutants," Yuri said, thinking aloud, his mind working through the problem. "They are psychic projections, grief, rage, the last moments of 1,000 people given form." "They sound pretty solid to me," Pavel shouted as a large chunk of plaster fell from the wall. A new thought struck Yuri, a desperate, insane gamble based on a stalker legend he had always dismissed as fantasy. He remembered the dead stalker's PDA, the log entry. He keeps talking about his family, about getting back to his daughter. He looked at the skeletons on the bed, at the empty cradle, at the map in his hand. "They are not angry at us," Yuri said, a sudden, terrifying clarity in his voice. "They are lost. They are looking for something." He looked at Pavel, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "The sound, the chrono stain, the little girl with the doll, it is all connected. We did not just break their sleep. We stole their child." The main door to the apartment suddenly burst inward, ripped from its hinges by an unseen force. Standing in the doorway was the spectral, shimmering form of the father from the photograph. His face was a mask of pure, paternal rage. And behind him, the hallway was filled with dozens more ghostly figures, their eyes glowing with a cold, dead light. They had come to take their daughter back. Chapter 7: The Father's Rage. The figure of the father stood in the ruined doorway, a shimmering column of pure, concentrated grief. He was not a creature of flesh and blood, but a psychic construct, an echo given form by the collective trauma of the awakened sleepers. His features were indistinct, constantly shifting, but the emotion he projected was brutally clear. Rage. A father's protective fury, twisted by 30 years of unnatural slumber. Behind him, the hallway thronged with more of them. Pale, translucent shapes, their forms flickering like faulty holograms. They were the neighbors, the other residents of the block, all drawn to this focal point, all sharing the father's singular, obsessive goal. "Give it to me," a voice whispered inside Yuri's mind. It was not a sound but a direct impression, a thought that was not his own. It was a chorus of 1,000 voices, all speaking as one through the avatar of the father. "Give her back." Pavel fired. The shotgun's roar was a physical blow in the small apartment. The buckshot passed harmlessly through the father's shimmering form, peppering the wall behind him with pockmarks. The figure did not even flinch. "They are not solid," Pavel yelled, his voice cracking. He racked the shotgun, the sound of the pump action loud and desperate. "I told you," Yuri snapped, his mind racing. "They are not a problem to be solved with a gun." He held up the doll, the crude map clutched in his other hand. "This is what they want. They think we have their daughter." The father figure took a step into the room. As his shimmering foot crossed the threshold, the air grew incredibly cold. The moisture on the walls flash froze into intricate patterns of frost. He raised a hand, and the heavy sofa Pavel had used as a barricade lifted into the air, then flew across the room, smashing into the far wall with a tremendous crash. Yuri and Pavel scrambled back, dodging the projectile. They were cornered, trapped between the enraged psychic projection and the 15-story drop from the window. "Give her back." The mental voice was stronger now, a physical pressure inside Yuri's skull. "She is lost. We must find her." "We don't have her," Yuri shouted, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate against the silent psychic assault. "This is just a doll, a map." But the entities could not or would not understand. They operated on a primal, emotional logic. The doll was the symbol of their lost child. The Stalkers had the doll. Therefore, the Stalkers had their child. The father figure advanced, his form solidifying, becoming more defined. The other sleepers began to flow into the room behind him, their ghostly bodies merging with the walls, the floor, their pale faces looking out from the plaster and wood grain. The entire apartment was becoming an extension of their collective consciousness. "We have to get out of here," Pavel said, his back pressed against the window frame. He looked down at the street below. "I'd rather take my chances with the fall." A desperate idea, a terrible gamble, took shape in Yuri's mind. It was born of Oksana's riddles and the dead stalker's logs, a leap of logic that was either brilliant or suicidal. "The hospital," Yuri said, his voice tight with urgency. He held up the dog tag map. "The map leads to the hospital." Anton, the dead stalker from the PDA, he was obsessed with his daughter, Masha. What if the girl, the sleeper's daughter, was also named Masha? "What are you talking about?" Pavel demanded, as the floor began to buckle under the father's advance. "The zone," It creates patterns, it rhymes, Yuri explained, piecing it together as he spoke. The sleepers lost their daughter. Anton was losing his mind, thinking only of his. The psychic field merged the two. The sleepers think Anton's daughter is their own. They guided him here to find this doll, this map, believing it would lead them to her. But it drove him mad. It killed him. What does that matter now? It matters because their objective is not us, Yuri insisted. It is the hospital. They think their daughter is there. He took a deep breath. We are not their enemies. We are their guides. He holstered the Makarov. He stood up straight, holding the doll and the map out in front of him. It was an act of complete, terrifying surrender. You want this. You want the map to find your child. Yuri projected the thought with all the force of his will, focusing on the father figure. Then let us pass. We will take you there. The father stopped. His shimmering head tilted. The pressure inside Yuri's skull lessened, replaced by a feeling of confusion. A new voice, softer, feminine, the mother, entered his mind. Where is she? Is she safe? She is waiting at the hospital, Yuri projected, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. We were sent to bring you to her. You must let us lead the way. The rage in the room subsided, replaced by an emotion that was almost worse. A vast, bottomless ocean of sorrow and desperate hope. The father figure's form became less defined, more translucent. He stepped aside, clearing a path to the doorway. Yuri let out a breath he did not realize he was holding. He looked at Pavel. Don't shoot. Don't make any sudden moves, just walk. He stepped forward, moving past the father, his every nerve screaming. He walked into the hallway. The spectral forms of the sleepers parted before him, their cold, sorrowful eyes following his every move. He felt like a priest leading a procession of the damned. Pavel followed a half-step behind, his shotgun held low but ready. He moved with a stiff, unnatural gait, his face a pale mask of terror. They walked down the hallway, a moving bubble of silence in a sea of ghosts. The sleepers flowed around them, a river of silent misery. They descended the stairs, not as stalkers, but as unwilling prophets, leading a congregation of tormented spirits on a pilgrimage to a place of false hope. As they reached the lobby, Yuri risked a glance behind him. The father and mother figures were directly behind them, their forms coalescing, their purpose clear. The rest of the sleepers were merging into a single, cohesive mass of psychic energy, a shimmering, multi-limbed cloud that followed in their wake. They had become the heart of a phantom army. They stepped out of the building into the gray light of Pripyat. The zone was their prison. Now it was also their church, and they were leading the service. Take us to her, the chorus of voices whispered in their minds. Take us to our Masha. Yuri looked at the map in his hand, then in the direction of the Pripyat hospital. It was on the other side of the city, through some of the most dangerous, anomaly-ridden territory in the entire zone, and they had to cross it with an army of ghosts at their back. Ghosts that would tear them apart, mind and body, if their lie was discovered. Chapter 8. The Symphony of Rust. The procession moved through the dead city. Yuri walked in front, the doll held out like a holy relic. Pavel walked beside him, a shotgun-wielding acolyte. Behind them the sleepers flowed in a silent, shimmering tide. They were a single, unified entity now, a psychic storm given a vague, humanoid shape that drifted over the cracked pavement. Their sorrow was a palpable force, a psychic cold that withered the weeds and sent mutated rats scurrying into the sewers. This spectral escort offered a strange form of protection. The few lurkers and wild dogs that skulked in the alleys shied away from the procession, whining and retreating from the overwhelming psychic presence. For the first time, Yuri and Pavel were not the weakest things in the food chain. They were the masters of a ghost legion. It was a terrifying and intoxicating feeling. Their path, dictated by the crude map, led them towards Pripyat's industrial sector. The residential blocks gave way to warehouses, factories, and the skeletal remains of heavy machinery. Rust was the dominant color here, on the walls, the fences, the abandoned vehicles. It was a landscape of decay. As they approached a vast, open railway yard, a new sound began. It was a faint, high-pitched hum, a single, pure note that seemed to vibrate in their bones. Yuri checked his detector. High level of mimetic energy, auditory hazard. He pulled a small box from his belt and handed one of the objects inside to Pavel. They were a pair of high-grade military-issue earplugs. Put these in. It will not block it completely, but it may help. They inserted the plugs. The humming was muffled but still present, a persistent pressure against their eardrums. As they entered the yard, the source of the sound became apparent. The air was filled with swarms of what looked like moths, but as they drew closer, they saw the insects were made of metal. Their wings were flakes of razor-sharp rust that beat the air with a furious, hypnotic rhythm, creating the piercing drone. The iron swarm. They are usually drawn to heat, Yuri said, his voice loud to be heard over the hum. Our suits should protect us. But the swarm was not behaving normally. The moths were not flying at random. They were moving in organized patterns, creating complex, shifting clouds of rust. And the note they produced was not constant. It was changing in pitch and timbre, creating a bizarre, discordant melody, a symphony of rust. In the center of the yard, near a line of decaying freight cars, a man was standing. He was gaunt, dressed in rags, his skin the color of old parchment. He was conducting the swarms, his arms moving in sweeping, graceful arcs, like the maestro of a demonic orchestra. It is a stalker, Pavel breathed, his hand tightening on his shotgun. He is controlling them. The conductor turned his head. His eyes were wide, manic, his lips drawn back in an ecstatic grin. He saw them. He saw the cloud of spirits trailing behind them. His grin widened. He flicked his wrist, and a section of the swarm detached from the main cloud and shot towards them. "Get down," Yuri yelled. They dropped to the ground as the cloud of metal insects flew over their heads. They heard a series of sharp pings as the moths struck the concrete wall behind them, chipping off pieces of stone. The sleepers reacted. The psychic cloud surged forward, its formless shape rising up like a striking cobra. It enveloped the attacking swarm. For a moment, there was a violent vortex of shimmering spirits and swirling rust flakes. The high-pitched humming of the moths was cut off, replaced by a terrible, silent scream that echoed only in Yuri's and Pavel's minds. The psychic cloud contracted. When it pulled back, the iron swarm was gone, annihilated. The conductor's grin vanished, replaced by a look of outrage. "You interrupt the music," he shrieked, his voice thin and reedy. "You disturb the resonance. You will pay." He waved both arms, and the entire, massive swarm, billions of razor-winged insects, rose into the air. The humming intensified, becoming a physically painful drone that vibrated their teeth in their skulls. The swarm formed into a solid, spinning vortex of rusted metal, a cyclone of razors aimed directly at them. The sleepers met the charge. The cloud of spirits surged forward, wrapping itself around the rust cyclone. The two forces, one of metal and sound, the other of spirit and sorrow, collided. The air crackled with invisible energy. Flashes of light, like static discharges, erupted within the maelstrom. Yuri knew they could not stay. This was a battle of forces they did not understand. He grabbed Pavel's arm. "Move, while they are distracted." They scrambled to their feet and ran, hugging the line of freight cars, trying to get around the epic supernatural conflict. The psychic shriek of the sleepers and the physical drone of the swarm was a nauseating combination that threatened to tear their minds apart, even with the earplugs. They were halfway across the yard when one of the freight car doors slid open with a loud groan. A figure stepped out. It was a man in a stalker suit, his face hidden by a gas mask. But something was wrong. His movements were stiff, jerky. He held a rifle, but he held it loosely, unnaturally. "Another one," Pavel said, raising his shotgun. Yuri looked closer and saw the fine, web-like filaments of mycelium covering the man's suit, connecting his joints to the dark interior of the freight car. "A puppet," Yuri warned. "A corpse, reanimated by a parasitic fungus." The puppet raised its rifle. Before it could fire, a spectral tendril from the main cloud of sleepers lashed out. It wrapped around the puppet and yanked it off its feet. The body was dragged into the swirling conflict and was instantly torn apart, the suit and the corpse shredded into nothing. They kept running. They cleared the railway yard and ducked into a narrow alley between two warehouses, the sound of the battle fading behind them. They leaned against a wall, panting, their ears ringing, their heads throbbing. "What was that?" Pavel gasped. "A symphony of rust," Yuri said. "A rare, sound-based anomaly. That Stalker. He must have found a way to control it, or it controlled him." He looked back the way they had come. The sounds of the conflict were dying down. He did not know which side had won, and he did not care. He checked the dog tag map. The hospital was close, less than a kilometer away. They were almost at the end of this insane pilgrimage. As he put the map away, he noticed something. A fine reddish-brown dust coated his gloves, his suit, his gear. He looked at Pavel. He was covered in it too. It was rust, from the swarm. A sudden, terrifying thought occurred to him. He pulled off a glove. On the back of his hand, a tiny, shining flake of metal was embedded in his skin. As he watched, it seemed to sink, disappearing beneath the surface. It did not bleed. It did not hurt. It was just gone. He felt a strange vibration under his skin, a faint, high-pitched hum that was not in his ears but inside his own body. The song of the rust. They had not escaped unscathed. They had been infected. Chapter 9. The Doctor in the Basement. The Pripyat hospital was a monument to despair. A sprawling complex of interconnected buildings. Its windows were black, empty eyes staring out over a courtyard littered with rusted gurneys and ambulances. Yuri and Pavel approached it with a sense of finality. This was the place on the map. This was where their lie would be exposed. The spectral cloud of sleepers followed them into the courtyard, the collective hope and anticipation a heavy, suffocating blanket. The entity seemed to shrink, its form becoming denser as it drew closer to its supposed goal. It was focused, expectant. They entered through the main doors, which hung from their hinges like broken teeth. The lobby was a vast, echoing space, its floor covered in a thick layer of gas masks, discarded by the liquidators in the frantic, early days of the disaster. Their round, goggle-eyed faces seemed to stare up at them from the floor, a silent, accusing audience. Yuri consulted the dog tag map. The X was in the basement. Of course it was. "She is here," the mother's voice whispered in his mind, laced with a trembling, desperate hope. "I can feel her." They found the stairs leading down. The air grew colder, damper, carrying the scent of mold and formaldehyde. The basement was a labyrinth of concrete corridors, lit only by the narrow beams of their headlamps and the faint, shimmering glow of the sleepers flowing behind them. Pipes snaked across the ceiling, dripping a dark, viscous liquid that sizzled when it hit the floor. The map led them to a heavy, steel door at the end of a long corridor. A faded sign, mostly obscured by grime, read "ARCHIVES, authorized personnel only." This was it, the end of the line. Yuri's hand trembled as he reached for the handle. He took a deep breath, preparing for the psychic backlash, for the rage that would surely annihilate them when the sleepers discovered the room was empty. He pushed the door open. It swung inward with a low, mournful groan. The room was not empty. It was a large, archival storage room lined with rows of metal shelves. The shelves were not filled with files but with hundreds of glass jars, and in each jar, suspended in a pale, yellowish fluid, was a biological specimen, a mutated hand with too many fingers, a dog's skull with horns, a twisted, unrecognizable organ. It was a private collection of the zone's horrors. In the center of the room, sitting at a metal desk cluttered with surgical tools and strange, jury-rigged scientific equipment, was a man. He wore a stained, white doctor's coat over a stalker suit. He was bald, his skin unnaturally pale, and he was meticulously dissecting a small, mutated creature that looked like a rat with wings. He did not look up as they entered. "Close the door," the doctor said, his voice calm and melodic without a trace of surprise. "You are letting the chill out." Yuri and Pavel stood frozen in the doorway. The cloud of sleepers hesitated behind them, a shimmering wall of confusion. This was not what they were expecting. The doctor placed his scalpel down with surgical precision. He finally looked up. His eyes were a startling, intense blue. They were the eyes of a fanatic. "So, the shepherds have brought the flock. I was wondering when you would arrive." "Who are you?" Yuri demanded, his voice a low growl. "I am a student of the zone," the doctor replied with a small, serene smile. "A biologist, a theologian, some have called me a collector." His gaze shifted to the spectral cloud behind them. And you are a magnificent specimen, a cohesive Gestalt consciousness born of localized trauma, truly remarkable. I have been studying you for weeks. The sleepers did not react. They seemed paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of the scene. Their psychic presence was a low hum of confusion and disappointment. This is not the place. She is not here. You know what they are? Pavel asked, his voice hushed. Of course, the doctor said. They are a symphony of grief, but like any symphony, they need a conductor, a purpose, a focal point. His blue eyes twinkled. For a time, they chose a stalker named Anton, a weak man obsessed with his own lost child. He was an imperfect vessel. He broke. The doctor gestured vaguely towards a dark corner of the room. His component parts are now in several jars. A cold horror washed over Yuri. This was the man from the log, Anton's partner, the killer. The doctor's eyes settled on the doll in Yuri's hand. Ah, and you have the key. Excellent. I crafted that myself. The map was a crude touch, I admit, but effective. You set this all up, Yuri stammered, his mind struggling to comprehend the scale of the manipulation. One must bait the trap to catch the beast, the doctor said simply. I needed a catalyst, something to concentrate their psychic energy, something to bring them here, to me. He stood up. He was taller than he looked sitting down, unnaturally thin. He walked over to a large metal locker in the corner of the room and opened it. Inside, suspended by leather straps, was a little girl. She was perhaps 7 years old with blonde hair and a pale, sleeping face. She was dressed in a simple, pre-disaster dress. She was not a ghost. She was real, flesh and blood. The psychic hum from the sleepers instantly changed. It became a sharp, piercing shriek of recognition. Joy, love, longing. The cloud surged forward, flowing around Yuri and Pavel, converging on the locker. Masha. The doctor smiled. Not their Masha, of course. Theirs is long dead. This one is from a village on the border, a recent acquisition, but in their current state they cannot tell the difference. She is a symbol, a perfect, empty vessel for their devotion. He pulled a complex-looking helmet from a shelf, a web of wires and electrodes connected to a humming power source. They have the potential to reshape reality, but they lack focus, direction. With this child as a focal point and my device to channel them, I will become the new heart of the zone. I will be its mind. I will control it. He was insane, a monster wearing the guise of a scientist. As the sleepers converged on the sleeping girl, their shimmering forms began to solidify, to coalesce around her. The doctor moved to place the helmet on her head. No, Yuri said. It was not a shout. It was a cold, hard statement of fact. He raised the Makarov, but before he could fire, a searing pain erupted in his hand. He looked down. The spot where the rust flake had entered his skin was now a spiderweb of reddish-brown lines spreading across his flesh. The humming in his body intensified, becoming a piercing shriek. His fingers seized up, and the pistol clattered to the floor. The rust infection, the symphony had marked him. Pavel raised his shotgun, but he too cried out in pain, stumbling back. The same reddish lines were spreading across his own skin, crawling up his arm from his hand. The infection was taking hold, paralyzing them. The doctor chuckled. Did you think you could walk through the maestro's garden and not take a flower with you? The resonance is in you now. You are becoming part of the song. He turned back to the girl, the helmet in his hands. He was going to enslave the minds of 1,000 grieving souls, using an innocent child as a battery, and they were powerless to stop him. The sleepers, lost in their ecstatic reunion, were oblivious. They were being led to a new, eternal prison. The hunt for their lost daughter was over. Their new life as a god's plaything was about to begin. Chapter 10. The Resonance Cascade. The doctor's laboratory was a resonant chamber of psychic energy. The sleepers swirled around the unconscious girl, a vortex of shimmering ectoplasm and raw emotion. Their collective joy was a palpable force, a sweet, cloying pressure that made the air thick and hard to breathe. They were blind to the doctor's true intentions, lost in a reunion that was a carefully constructed lie. Yuri fought against the paralysis creeping up his arm. The rust-colored lines had reached his elbow, a network of metallic veins under his skin. The humming in his body was a dissonant symphony, each nerve ending a violin string being scraped by a rusty razor. He gritted his teeth, the muscles in his jaw bunching. He could not let this happen. He would not. Beside him, Pavel was on one knee, his shotgun lying on the floor. He was clutching his afflicted arm, his face a mask of agony. "What is this?" he gasped, his voice strained. "What's happening to us?" "The rust," Yuri grunted, forcing the words out. "The maestro's parting gift, a resonance, a frequency. It's tearing us apart from the inside." The doctor adjusted the helmet, preparing to place it on the girl's head. He looked over at them, a detached, clinical curiosity in his blue eyes. "Fascinating, isn't it? The infection is not a poison. It is a tuning fork. It is attuning your cellular structure to the zone's background frequency. Your flesh is being rewritten, note by note. Soon, you will be nothing more than statues of corroded iron, singing my masterpiece for all eternity." He turned his attention back to the girl. This was it, the final moment. Yuri's mind, honed by decades of survival, raced through options, discarding each one. He could not reach the Makarov. He could not fight. His body was a prison. But the zone was not just a physical place. He looked at the swirling mass of spirits. They were the most powerful weapon in the room, and they were being pacified by a simple, cruel deception. He needed to break the spell. He needed to show them the truth. He closed his eyes, shutting out the pain in his arm, the sight of the mad doctor, the laboratory of horrors. He focused his will, his consciousness, into a single, sharp point. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his mind. For years, he had resisted the zone's psychic influence. He had built walls in his mind, shielded himself with logic and discipline. Now he did the opposite. He tore those walls down. He opened himself up to the ambient mental static, to the whispers and the echoes, and he screamed, not with his voice but with his soul. He projected a single, powerful image into the heart of the sleeper's gestalt consciousness. It was the memory of the chronostain, the image of the little girl, his little girl, standing alone in the middle of the street, her face a mask of heartbreaking sorrow. But he changed it. He twisted it. In his projected memory, the girl was not alone. The doctor was there, a tall, thin figure in a white coat reaching for her, his face a leering mask of clinical cruelty. The psychic scream hit the sleepers like a thunderclap. Their joyous chorus faltered, replaced by a wave of confusion. The image was a contradiction, a dissonant note in their perfect symphony of reunion. The doctor staggered back, his hands flying to his temples. What is this? An echo? Interference? Yuri pushed harder, feeding the projection with all his pain and rage. He layered it with another image, the doctor standing over the body of Anton, a bloody scalpel in his hand. He poured every ounce of his conviction into the psychic broadcast. He is a liar. He is a cage maker. He does not love your child. He will use her. He will use you. Pavel, seeing what Yuri was doing, joined him. He closed his eyes, his face contorted in concentration. He projected his own fear and rage, the memory of the Glass Hounds, the terror of the fall, the face of the dead stalker in the gas station. He added his own verse to Yuri's chorus of hate. He is the monster under the bed. He is the shadow in the corner. He is the reason your children are lost. The combined psychic assault was a battering ram of pure negative emotion. The sleepers' confusion turned to doubt, then to suspicion, and finally to a new, terrible rage. Their form, which had been a soft, shimmering cloud around the girl, began to change. It darkened, solidified. Spectral faces, twisted in fury, emerged from the swirling mass. The sweet pressure in the room was replaced by a crushing, malevolent weight. Liar, the word was a psychic shockwave that cracked the glass jars on the shelves. Deceiver. The doctor screamed, stumbling back from the girl. No, you are imperfect, flawed, you are supposed to obey. The cloud of spirits ignored him. It was no longer a gentle flock. It was a storm, a hurricane of vengeful ghosts. It contracted violently, pulling away from the girl, and turned its full, unified fury upon the doctor. The doctor raised his hands, trying to shield himself. I am your master. I am your God. 100 spectral arms made of solidified rage and memory shot out from the central mass. They wrapped around the doctor's limbs, his torso, his neck. They lifted him off the floor. He struggled, his serene composure shattered, his face a rictus of terror. This is not the correct data, he shrieked. The experiment is contaminated. The sleepers did not offer a reply. They simply squeezed. The doctor's bones broke with a series of sickening, audible cracks. His body was twisted into an unnatural shape. A final, gurgling scream was cut short as his head was torn from his body. The spirits ripped him apart, not with physical force, but with the sheer, focused power of their collective hatred. Within seconds, there was nothing left of the doctor but a fine, gray dust that settled on the floor. The psychic storm receded, its rage spent. The cloud of spirits, now a dark, somber gray, hovered in the center of the room. They had their vengeance, but they were still lost. Their hope had been a lie, and the truth was a fresh, open wound. As the psychic pressure vanished, the paralysis in Yuri's arm receded. The humming in his flesh lessened. He could move his fingers again. He staggered to his feet, grabbing the edge of a shelf for support. Pavel did the same, picking up his shotgun, his face ashen. They looked at the girl. She was still unconscious, strapped in the locker, oblivious to the psychic carnage that had just unfolded. Then they looked at the sleepers. The entity had no leader now, no purpose. It was just a raw, powerful, and unpredictable mass of grief. Its attention slowly turned from the spot where the doctor had died to them, the shepherds who had led them to a false paradise, the liars who had used their hope as a weapon. Yuri felt a new wave of psychic energy wash over him, and this time it was not confusion. It was cold, calculated judgment. Chapter 11: The Choice. The rage of the sleepers had been a wildfire, hot and swift. What replaced it was a cold, deliberate malice that was infinitely more terrifying. The dark, swirling cloud of spirits contracted, its form becoming dense and sharp-edged. The spectral faces within the mass were no longer contorted in fury. They were blank, emotionless, their eyes fixed on Yuri and Pavel, the eyes of judges. "You lied," the unified voice whispered in their minds. The words were not shouted. They were delivered with the flat, chilling finality of a death sentence. "You used our pain. You used our hope." "We did what we had to do to survive," Yuri projected back, his mind reeling. "He would have enslaved you. He would have turned you into a weapon." "You are no different," the sleepers replied. "You guided us. You used us as your shield. You are tainted. You must be cleansed." A tendril of dark, solidified spirit lashed out. It was not aimed at Yuri or Pavel, but at the Makarov lying on the floor. It wrapped around the pistol, and the metal began to corrode at an impossible rate. Within seconds, the gun dissolved into a pile of rust-colored dust, a grim echo of the rust infection that still pulsed under their skin. They were being disarmed, piece by piece. Pavel raised his shotgun. "Don't," Yuri warned, his voice low. "It will do nothing." But Pavel was not aiming at the spirits. He aimed at the wall of glass jars behind them. He fired. The blast shattered a dozen jars. Preserved mutants and yellowed fluid rained down onto the floor. The sudden, violent noise was a shock to the psychic stillness. The sleeper cloud recoiled, its form wavering. It was a momentary distraction, nothing more, but it was enough. "The girl," Yuri shouted, the desperate plan forming in his mind. "Get the girl." While the sleepers were momentarily disrupted, Yuri lunged for the locker. He fumbled with the leather straps, his fingers clumsy. He unbuckled the restraints holding the unconscious child. He scooped her into his arms. She was light, a fragile weight. "What are you doing?" Pavel demanded, racking another shell into the shotgun's chamber. "They see her as their own," Yuri grunted, shifting the girl's weight. "She is our only shield, our only way out." He turned to face the sleeper cloud, holding the child out in front of him. It was a monstrous act, using a child as a human shield, and the self-loathing that washed over him was a physical nausea. But it was their only chance. The sleepers stopped their advance. Their blank, judgmental faces were replaced once more with expressions of profound sorrow and longing. They could not harm the vessel of their hope, even if it was held by their betrayers. They were paralyzed by their own grief, a stalemate. "Give her to us," the mother's voice pleaded, cutting through the others. "Let us have her. Let us be a family again." "If we give her to you, you will never let her go," Yuri projected back. "She will become your new anchor, your new prison. She deserves a life, not an eternity as a ghost's plaything. It was a gamble. He was appealing to the sliver of humanity that might still exist within the Gestalt, the parental instinct that had driven them from their slumber. For a long moment the sleeper cloud was still. The psychic debate was a silent, raging storm in Yuri's mind. He could feel their conflict, the war between their possessive, grieving desire and the terrible truth of his words. Finally, the cloud parted. It formed a corridor, a path leading from the laboratory door back into the hospital's dark hallways. It was an offer, a choice. "Leave," the chorus whispered. "Take the child from this place. Take her from the zone, and never return. If you are ever seen in this city again, we will unmake you." The path was clear. Their lives were spared. All they had to do was walk away. Yuri looked at Pavel. Pavel looked at the girl, then back at the swirling vortex of souls. He gave a single, sharp nod. Carrying the girl, Yuri began to walk. Pavel moved backwards, his shotgun trained on the spirits, covering their retreat. They moved out of the laboratory, down the corridor, and up the stairs, the cloud of sleepers watching them from a distance, a silent, grieving honor guard. They emerged from the hospital into the gray afternoon. The city was silent. There were no mutants, no anomalies. It was as if the sleepers' truce extended to the entire city, a temporary bubble of safe passage. They walked for hours, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and the hospital. The girl remained unconscious in Yuri's arms. He checked her pulse. It was steady. Her breathing was even. She was not harmed, merely sedated by whatever drug the doctor had used. As they reached the city's outskirts, near the rusted-out checkpoint where they had first entered, Pavel finally spoke. "What now?" he asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "We can't just walk back to the settlement with a child. People will ask questions we can't answer." Yuri looked down at the girl's face. She was just a child, a pawn in a game played by monsters and madmen. He thought of his own daughter, of the family in the photograph, of Anton's desperate audio logs. The zone was a machine that chewed up families and spat out ghosts. "There are villages further south," Yuri said, "outside the influence of the stalker gangs and the military patrols. Simple places. A child could appear there, an orphan found by a hunter. She could have a life, a real one." It was a new mission, not for an artifact, not for money, for something else entirely. Pavel was silent for a long time. "And what about us?" he asked, his voice low. He held up his arm. The rust-colored lines were still there, faded but visible. "What about this?" Yuri looked at his own hand. The metallic veins were a permanent scar, a reminder of their infection. The humming was gone for now, but he knew it was dormant, not cured. They were marked. They were part of the zone now, in a way they had never been before. "I do not know," Yuri admitted. It was the truest thing he had said in a long time. They found a sheltered place, a collapsed railway tunnel to rest as night fell. They had a choice to make. They could abandon the girl, save themselves, and disappear into the zone's shadow economy. Or they could see this through. They could try to do one good thing in a life defined by selfishness and survival. Yuri gently laid the girl down on a bed of old rags, placing his jacket over her for warmth. He looked at Pavel, the first trace of something other than suspicion in his eyes. They had survived. They had faced the zone's heart of darkness and walked away. They were no longer just rivals. They were partners, and they had a child to save. Chapter 12. The Echo in the Blood. They traveled south for 2 days, moving through the zone's less volatile outer ring. The landscape shifted from the concrete ruins of Pripyat to a sprawling, overgrown wilderness of swamps, forests, and abandoned kolkhozes. The truce of the sleepers did not extend this far. The zone was alive again, its familiar dangers stirring in the shadows. The girl, who they learned was named Anna, had woken on the first morning. She was not frightened, merely quiet and disoriented. The doctor's drugs had left her memories of the past few days a blurry fog. She knew her name. She knew she was from a village called Zalesai, but she could not remember how she came to be in the hospital. Yuri and Pavel offered no explanations. They were just two grim-faced men who gave her food and kept her safe from the things that screeched in the night. A strange, fragile dynamic formed between the three of them. Anna, with the innocent resilience of a child, accepted her situation with a quiet fatalism. She would walk between the two stalkers, sometimes holding the edge of Yuri's coat. Pavel, surprisingly, was the one who spoke to her, answering her simple questions about the strange plants or the oddly colored birds. His gruff attempts at conversation were a stark contrast to Yuri's stoic silence. But under the surface of this strange, temporary family, a deeper problem was festering: the rust infection. The humming in their flesh had returned. It was faint, almost subliminal, a low thrum that was most noticeable in the dead quiet of the night. With it came a new, disturbing symptom. The world was beginning to look different. Patches of rust on a fence seemed to shimmer with an inner light. The reddish-brown leaves of the autumn trees seemed to pulse with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. The color was becoming more vibrant, more beautiful, more alluring. On the third night, they took shelter in the shell of an old stone church. Yuri was on watch, sitting near the collapsed belfry, while Pavel and Anna slept near a small, smokeless fire. The moon was a silver coin in the clear sky. Staring out at the moonlit swamp, Yuri saw the patches of stagnant, rust-colored water begin to glow. The light was beautiful, and it was calling to him. A soft, melodic humming rose from the water, a siren song that promised peace, rest, and an end to all pain. It promised resonance. He found himself standing, taking a step towards the church door, his body moving of its own accord. The song was everything. He had to be part of it. He had to join the symphony. Yuri. Pavel's voice cut through the haze. Yuri stopped, blinking. He looked down at his feet. He was halfway across the church. He had no memory of getting up. "Don't listen to it," Pavel said. He was sitting up, his face etched with concern. "It's a trick. The infection, it's trying to lure you out." Yuri returned to his post, his heart hammering. He was losing control of his own body. "How long have you been awake?" he asked, his voice rough. "All night," Pavel admitted. "It's in my head, too, the song. It's coming from anything that's rusting, decaying. It's calling us home." They were running out of time. The infection was not just a physical malady, it was a psychological one. It was slowly, methodically attuning them to the zone's fundamental frequency of decay. The doctor had not been lying. They were becoming part of the song. The next morning, the physical symptoms had worsened. The reddish lines on their skin were darker, more pronounced. Yuri's prosthetic leg had begun to emit a low, resonant hum, and the joints were stiffening with a fine, powdery corrosion that had not been there before. Pavel complained of a metallic taste in his mouth that would not go away. They were close to the zone's southern border, but their progress was slowing. Their bodies were becoming heavy, their movements sluggish. They were fighting a war on two fronts, against the zone's external threats and against the rebellion of their own selves. That afternoon they stumbled into a clearing and found a scene of recent, terrible violence. A group of stalkers, 4 of them, lay dead around a cold campfire. Their bodies were not torn by mutants or riddled with bullets. They were twisted, contorted, their limbs bent at impossible angles, and their skin was covered in a thick, metallic shell of rust. They were statues, the Rustmen of Yanov Station or others like them. Pavel knelt beside one of the bodies, his face grim. The symphony, it's spreading. It is not a disease, Yuri corrected, his voice a low drone. It is a conversion. This is what awaits us. He looked at Anna, who was staring at the grotesque statues with wide, uncomprehending eyes. They could not let her see them like this. They could not let her be there when the final change took them. A new urgency spurred them on. They pushed through the pain, through the alluring song of the rust that now seemed to come from every direction. They had to get Anna out. It was the only thing that mattered. Late that day they saw it, a thin line of smoke on the horizon, a village, Zailsai. They stopped at the edge of the woods, looking down at the small, humble collection of wooden houses. It was a place outside of time, a village that had survived both the Soviet Union and the zone. "This is it," Pavel said. "This is as far as we go." They could not enter the village. They were contaminated not just with radiation but with something far worse. An idea, a song. They could not risk spreading the infection. Yuri knelt down so he was at eye level with Anna. He tried to force a smile, but his facial muscles felt stiff, uncooperative. "You see your home, Anna. You are safe now." Anna looked from the village to the 2 grim figures. For the first time, she seemed to understand that they were not coming with her. Her lower lip began to tremble. "You're leaving." "We have to," Pavel said, his voice softer than Yuri had ever heard it. "We have other business back in the zone." Yuri reached into his pouch and pulled out the cloth doll. He had kept it. He did not know why. He pressed it into her hands. "You keep this, to remember. Well, just keep it." Anna hugged the doll. She looked at them both, her eyes welling with tears. "Will I see you again?" The question was a physical blow. Yuri could not answer. He simply stood up, his joints creaking. He turned his back on the village, on the girl, on the single good thing he had ever done. He looked north, back towards the gray, brooding heart of the zone. The song was louder now, calling him. "Go, Anna," Pavel said, his voice thick. "Go home and don't look back." They watched as the small figure ran down the hill, towards the smoke, towards safety. They watched until she was just a tiny speck, until she disappeared between the houses. She did not look back. For a long time, the two stalkers stood at the edge of the forest, two statues of men on the brink of becoming something else. They had succeeded. They had saved the child. But in doing so, they had sealed their own fates. They were too far gone to ever rejoin the human world. So, Pavel said, his voice a hollow echo of its former self. What now, old man? Do we just walk back in and let the rust take us? Yuri looked at his hands. The metallic veins seemed to pulse in time with the low hum that was now his entire world. The song was pulling him, urging him to return to the railway yard, to find the maestro's orchestra and take his place in the choir. It promised an end to pain, an end to struggle. It promised harmony. But there was another feeling, too. A stubborn, defiant spark of dissonance, the part of him that was still human, the part that had carried a child for 2 days through hell. No, Yuri said, his voice a low, grating sound like metal on stone. The doctor said the infection was a tuning fork. He said it was rewriting us, but a song can be changed. A symphony can have more than one movement. He looked at Pavel, a new, cold fire in his eyes. We are not going to let the zone write our ending. We are going to find a way to rewrite the song. It was an impossible goal, a madman's boast against a godlike force. But it was a purpose. And for two men who had nothing left but a creeping, metallic death, a purpose was the only thing worth living or dying for. They turned their backs on the world of the living and together walked back into the zone. Chapter 13. The Oracle's Price. The journey back towards the center of the zone was a descent into a private hell. With Anna gone, the thin veneer of their humanity began to crack and peel away. The rust infection was no longer a creeping threat. It was a constant, aggressive assault. The world was a symphony, and they were the discordant notes. The humming was ever present, a constant pressure urging them to surrender, to find a patch of rusting metal and simply lie down, to let the conversion complete itself. It took every ounce of their willpower to place one foot in front of the other, to resist the siren song of their own dissolution. Their senses betrayed them. A pile of scrap metal would appear as a beautiful, glowing sculpture. The croak of a mutated frog would sound like a perfect musical note. They began to experience auditory and visual hallucinations. Pavel saw his reflection in a puddle, and for a moment it was a statue of pure, polished chrome. Yuri heard the voice of the little girl from the chronostane whispering on the wind, telling him to come home to rest. Their paranoia, which had been seeded by the synaptic mimic and then buried under the weight of their shared mission, returned with a vengeance. They began to suspect each other's motives again, but in a new, twisted way. "You hear it too, don't you?" Pavel accused one night, his eyes wide and feverish as they huddled in a concrete pipe. "You want to give in. You want to leave me behind." "It is you who is weak," Yuri shot back, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. The reddish lines on his face were stark in the gloom. "You walk slower. You are looking for a place to lie down. You are a liability." The infection was amplifying their baser instincts, their fear and mistrust, using their own psychology as a weapon against them. They were a two-man microcosm of the zone's entropy, slowly breaking down, turning on each other. They survived only because they both understood their single, unifying hope, Oksana, the Oracle of Limansk. She was the one who had set them on this path. She was a creature of the zone, steeped in its madness and its secrets. If anyone knew a way to reverse their condition, it would be her. She was their last and only chance. The journey to Limansk was a blur of pain, hunger, and a constant, grinding battle against the song in their blood. They fought off lurkers with a clumsy, sluggish fury. They navigated anomaly fields through sheer, stubborn memory, their instincts now completely unreliable. They were two dying men, propped up only by a single, desperate idea. They found her bus where they had left it, the generator still sputtering, the single bulb still casting its jaundiced glow. The stench from within was just as they remembered. They burst in, foregoing any ceremony. Oksana was sitting in her usual spot, rocking back and forth. Her obsidian eyes seemed to track them as they entered. "The shepherds return," she hissed, her voice a dry rattle. "But the lamb is gone, and the wolves are inside you." "The rust," Pavel gasped, leaning against the door frame for support. "A stalker who called himself the Maestro, he infected us. Is there a cure?" Oksana let out a long, slow cackle. "Cure? There is no cure for a song that has been heard. You are bells and the zone has rung you. Soon the ringing will stop and you will be silent metal." "There must be something," Yuri insisted, his voice a low growl of desperation. "An artifact, a ritual, anything." Oksana stopped rocking. She tilted her head, her black, reflective eyes seeming to peer into their very souls. "Everything in the zone has a price. Every action has a reaction. Every note has an echo. You seek to silence the song inside you. You must replace it with another, a louder one, a more terrible one." She gestured a trembling, grimy hand towards a heavy, lead-lined box in the corner of the bus. "There is an artifact, a thing of great power. The Stalkers call it the Black Heart. It does not grant wishes. It does not kill. It erases." "What does it erase?" Yuri asked. "Memories," Oksana whispered, a sliver of something that might have been fear in her voice. "But not just from the mind. It erases the memory of a thing from the universe itself. It can pluck a thread from the tapestry of what is and what was. It can make it so that something never existed at all." Yuri and Pavel exchanged a look. To erase the infection, to make it so they had never entered that railway yard. "Where is this artifact?" Pavel asked. "It is not a matter of where," Oksana said. "It is a matter of what you are willing to pay. The heart feeds on echoes, on things with weight. To erase the song of the rust from your blood, you must give it something of equal or greater value, a memory that defines you. The moment you fell in love, the face of your first child, the day you became a stalker." Her head swiveled towards Yuri. "The memory of the daughter you lost." She turned to Pavel. "The memory of the brother you failed to save." The words struck them like physical blows. She knew. Of course she knew. She saw the echoes of their pasts as clearly as they saw the junk in her bus. "It will take the memory," she continued, her voice a hypnotic drone. "And in exchange it will erase the maestro's song from your timeline. You will be as you were before you met him. The rust will be gone, but you will have a hole inside you, a void where something precious used to be. You will not know what you have lost, but you will feel its absence for the rest of your days. A phantom limb of the soul." She pointed to the box. "The black heart is in there. The choice is yours. Live as hollow men, or die as singing statues. It makes no difference to the zone." She began to rock again, humming her discordant tune. The audience was over. Yuri and Pavel stood in the suffocating confines of the bus, the humming in their bodies a constant, maddening reminder of their fate. The lead-lined box sat in the corner, a promise and a curse. To be healed, they had to mutilate their own souls. They had to sacrifice the very memories that had shaped them, the ghosts that, for better or worse, made them who they were. It was a price that seemed almost worse than death. But the song of the rust was growing louder, and they both knew, with a terrible certainty, that they did not have much time left to choose. Chapter 14. The Black Heart. The lead-lined box was heavier than it looked. Yuri carried it out of the bus, his movements stiff and deliberate. Pavel followed, his face a pale, drawn mask. The humming in their flesh seemed to pulse in time with the unseen thing in the box. They did not speak. There were no words for the choice that lay before them. They took the box deep into a nearby petrified forest, a place where the trees were twisted, stone-like things. The air was still and dead. It felt like a graveyard, a fitting place for what they were about to do. Yuri set the box down. With a shared, grim look, they pried open the heavy lid. The thing inside was not a heart. It was a sphere of absolute, light-devouring blackness, roughly the size of a human head. It was not a solid object. It was a hole in the universe, a pocket of pure non-existence. It did not reflect light, it consumed it. Staring into it was like looking into the void between stars. It seemed to pull at their thoughts, at their very consciousness. This was the Black Heart. "How does it work?" Pavel asked, his voice a dry whisper. Yuri remembered Oksana's cryptic instructions. "We present it with the memory. We offer it as a sacrifice, one at a time." He looked at Pavel. "I will go first." It was not a question. Yuri's ghost was older, heavier. He had lived with it longer. He needed to know if this was truly the only way. He knelt before the box. He closed his eyes, shutting out the petrified trees, the gray sky, Pavel's worried face. He reached back in time, back through the decades of blood and grime and survival. He searched for the memory, the one that was his anchor, his curse, his entire reason for being the man he was. He found it. His daughter, Lena, she was 5 years old. It was her birthday. They were in their small apartment in Pripyat a life ago. The sunlight was streaming through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. She was laughing, her hair a tangle of blonde curls. He had just given her a gift, a small, hand-carved wooden bird. She was holding it up to the light, her face a perfect portrait of pure, unblemished joy. Her laugh was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He held the memory in his mind. He savored every detail, the smell of the birthday cake his wife was baking, the chipped paint on the windowsill, the warmth of the sun on his face. This memory was the last good thing he had. It was the moment before the world ended. It was the ghost that had driven him, the pain that had kept him alive. He opened his eyes and looked into the black sphere. He offered the memory up. He did not know how, he just did. He presented the image of his laughing daughter to the void. "Take it." The Black Heart responded. A thin, black tendril like a filament of smoke snaked out from the sphere. It moved slowly, tentatively through the air. It touched his forehead. There was no pain. There was only a sudden, profound, and overwhelming sensation of cold, a deep internal winter. It was not a physical coldness, but a spiritual one. He felt the memory being drawn out of him. He felt the threads of it unspooling from his mind. He saw his daughter's face begin to fade. Her laughter became a distant echo. The sunlight dimmed. He fought it. A primal, instinctual part of him screamed in protest. No, not this. Take anything else. But it was too late. The bargain had been struck. He felt a final, terrible, wrenching sensation, as if a part of his soul was being torn out by the roots. And then nothing. The black tendril retracted. The void in the box was inert once more. The humming in Yuri's body was gone. He looked down at his hand. The rust-colored lines had vanished. His skin was pale, scarred, but his own. He felt clean, he felt empty. There was a hole in his past, a space where something important used to be. He could feel its shape, its edges, but he could not see what had filled it. He knew he had once lived in Pripyat, that he'd had a family, but the details were gone. The faces were blank. The emotions were echoes without a source. He was a man staring at a locked room in his own mind with no memory of the key. The pain was gone, but so was the love. He looked up at Pavel. His own face was a stranger to him. The lines of grief that had defined his features for 30 years had been erased. He was a blank slate. Pavel stared at him, his mouth agape. "Yuri, your face, it's different." Yuri touched his own cheek. It felt like someone else's skin. "The rust is gone," he said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual gravelly texture. It worked. Now it was Pavel's turn. He knelt before the box, his face a mixture of terror and desperate hope. He closed his eyes. Yuri watched, a detached observer. He felt no empathy, no concern. Those emotions were tied to memories he no longer possessed. Pavel's ghost was younger, fresher. His brother Misha. They were teenagers exploring an abandoned factory on the edge of the zone, long before Pavel was a real stalker. It was a stupid dare. Misha had slipped on a rusted catwalk. Pavel had reached for his hand, their fingers had brushed, but he wasn't strong enough. He had watched his brother fall. The memory of that fall, of Misha's terrified face, of his own failure, was the engine of Pavel's reckless bravado. It was the guilt that drove him to take every risk, to gamble with his life, because he felt he did not deserve it. He offered the memory to the heart. The black tendril emerged again. It touched Pavel's forehead. He convulsed, a choked sob escaping his lips. He writhed on the ground for a moment, his hands clutching his head. Then he lay still. A moment later, he sat up. The reddish lines on his skin were gone. The feverish, haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a clear, calm emptiness. "Misha," he whispered. The name was a foreign word on his tongue. He knew it was important, but the reason was gone. The guilt, the shame, the driving force of his entire adult life had been surgically removed. He looked at Yuri, and Yuri looked back. They were two strangers, hollowed out and remade. They were healed and they were broken. They had survived the zone, but they had not escaped it. They had simply paid its ultimate price. Pavel slowly got to his feet. He looked at the black heart, this terrible, beautiful thing that had saved and damned them. With a sudden, violent kick, he sent the lead-lined box flying. It tumbled end over end and landed in a deep, muddy puddle. It sank beneath the surface without a trace. No one else would ever find it. No one else would have to make their choice. They stood in silence in the petrified forest. The zone was quiet around them. They were free. They could leave. They could go back to the world of men. But who were they now? They were men without ghosts, without history. They were amnesiacs of the soul. What now? Pavel asked, and the question was not the same one he had asked before. It was not about survival. It was about existence. Yuri looked north towards the heart of the zone. He felt no fear, no attachment, no hatred for it. It was just a place. Then he looked south towards the world of settlements and people. He felt nothing for that either. "I do not know," he said, and for the first time the words did not feel like an admission of defeat. They felt like a beginning. The beginning of a long, empty road. Chapter 15. The Ghost in the Machine. They left the zone. The journey out was a strange, muted affair. The dangers were still present, a shimmering vortex anomaly, the distant howl of mutants, but Yuri and Pavel navigated them with a detached, mechanical efficiency. The fear was gone. A lifetime of hard-won zone instincts had been rooted in trauma and memory, and with those anchors gone, their survival skills felt like a borrowed coat, functional but ill-fitting. They walked not as partners, but as two solitary objects moving in the same direction. The fragile bond forged in the hospital and on the journey with Anna had been built on a shared history, a shared struggle. With that history surgically removed, they were strangers again, with nothing in common but a profound and unnerving emptiness. They reached the settlement on the zone's edge, the same wretched collection of shacks and bars where their journey had begun. The place had not changed. It was still mired in mud and desperation. But they had. They walked into the bar, the one where Yuri had studied his maps a lifetime ago. The bartender, a fat man with a scarred face, looked up. He showed no sign of recognition. Before, Yuri was the cartographer, a known, if not respected, figure. Pavel was the gambler, a cocky upstart. Now they were just two more nameless faces, two more ghosts drifting in from the zone. Their reputations, their very identities, had been part of the memories they had sacrificed. Pavel ordered a vodka. He drank it in one go, slamming the glass down on the counter. He stared into the murky mirror behind the bar at the stranger looking back at him. "I feel quiet," he said to Yuri, his voice flat. "That is the word," Yuri agreed. He felt no urge to drink, no desire for conversation. He felt only a profound stillness, a lack of internal noise. A stalker at the end of the bar, drunk and loud, was telling a story. And then the bloodsucker came out of the darkness, claws bigger than my head. I barely made it out alive. He laughed, a boisterous, grating sound. Pavel looked at the man, his head tilted with a kind of clinical curiosity. "Why would anyone go in there?" he asked Yuri, his voice a low monotone. "Into the zone. There is nothing there but death and radiation. It is illogical." Yuri considered the question. He knew on a factual level that he had spent most of his life going in there, for money, for artifacts. But the why, the deep, driving reason, was a blank. The hole where his daughter's memory used to be also contained his motivation. "I do not remember," he said. They sold their gear for a pittance. Their suits, their detectors, their weapons. The equipment was stained with the memory of their journey, but they felt no attachment to it. They kept only a handful of rubles, enough for a meal and a room for the night. That evening they sat in a small, grimy room above the bar. The silence between them was not tense or hostile. It was simply empty. They had nothing to say to each other. Their shared ordeal was a book with all the pages torn out. "I am leaving tomorrow," Pavel announced to the wall, "going west, to the city. Maybe find some work on the docks, something simple." He was trying to construct a future, to lay down new tracks over the empty space of his past. Yuri gave a slight nod. "I will go east. I hear there is work in the forestry commissions." They would go their separate ways. There was no reason to stay together. They were untethered from each other, from the zone, from themselves. As he lay on his thin mattress that night, staring at the water-stained ceiling, Yuri tried to feel something. Regret, sadness, relief. He could find nothing. He was a machine that had been expertly repaired, every gear and piston working perfectly, but the ghost, the operator, had vanished. A faint sound from the street below caught his attention. It was a child crying for its mother. The sound was thin, plaintive. Yuri listened. He waited for the familiar pang of grief, the echo of his own loss. Nothing came. It was just a noise. He closed his eyes. For the first time in 30 years, he did not dream of a laughing girl in a sunlit room. He did not dream at all. He slept the deep, dreamless, and utterly empty sleep of the truly dead. The healing was complete. The horror was just beginning. Chapter 16. A Flower in the Dust. 2 years passed. 2 years of quiet, empty days. Yuri worked in a lumber camp hundreds of kilometers east of the zone. It was hard, physical labor that required little thought. He was a good worker, methodical, tireless, silent. The other men gave him a wide berth. They called him the statue. He lived in a small cabin, kept to himself, and never spoke of his past because he had none to speak of. He was not unhappy. Unhappiness was an emotion rooted in memory, in the contrast between what is and what was. He existed in a perpetual, flavorless present. He ate, he worked, he slept. His life was a flat line. The hole inside him remained, a constant, low-grade ache he had learned to live with, like a phantom limb that had forgotten how to hurt. One day, a new foreman arrived at the camp. A young man with a familiar, swaggering gait and eyes that were a little too sharp. He had a faded, intricate tattoo of a snarling wolf on his forearm. Yuri felt a flicker of something, a ghost of a memory so faint it was like trying to remember the scent of rain from a decade-old drought. The foreman's name was Maxim. He was efficient, ruthless, and he had a way of looking at Yuri that was unsettling. One evening, Maxim cornered him outside the mess hall. "Kovalenko," Maxim said, the name sounding strange. "I've been looking for you." Yuri said nothing. "My father used to be a stalker," Maxim continued, his eyes boring into Yuri. "A long time ago, he and his partner pulled a legendary score, the heart of the zone, but they never cashed it in. They just vanished. My father ended up working the docks in Odessa, drank himself to death 10 years ago, never talked about the zone, but he used to have nightmares. He'd shout a name in his sleep. Maxim paused. He'd shout your name. Pavel's son. The swagger, the wolf tattoo, it was Pavel's. The name clicked into place, but without the memories to give it weight, it was just a sound. I do not know your father, Yuri said, his voice flat. It was the truth. Maxim's face hardened. He left a journal filled with insane ramblings, a mad witch, an army of ghosts, a girl named Anna, and you, the old man, the cartographer. It says you both went into a forest and came out. Different. He took a step closer. I don't care about the artifacts. I want to know what happened. What did the zone do to him? What did it do to you? Yuri looked at the young man's face, at the desperate need for answers, for a history that made sense. He saw the ghost that had driven Pavel's son to this remote lumber camp, a ghost born from the void Pavel had left behind. The zone takes things, Yuri said, the words coming from a place he did not understand. It is what it does. He turned and walked away, leaving Pavel's son standing alone in the encroaching darkness. He could offer no comfort, no answers. He was a library of burned books. The encounter unsettled him. It stirred the quiet emptiness within him. That night, for the first time in 2 years, he dreamed. It was not a memory. It was a single, powerful image. A single, perfect, blood-red rose blooming in a dusty window, glowing with an impossible green light. He woke up with a gasp, his heart pounding for the first time he could remember. The image was burned into his mind. He did not know what it meant, but it was the first thing that had felt real, that had felt like his in years. He quit his job the next day. He packed his meager belongings and began to walk. He did not know where he was going, only that he was being pulled by the memory of a flower he should not be able to remember. He drifted for months, working odd jobs, always moving southwest, back towards Ukraine, back towards the faint, gravitational pull of the zone. He was not seeking danger or fortune. He was a sleepwalker, following the signal of a forgotten dream. His journey ended in a small, dusty village on the edge of the exclusion zone's buffer territory. A quiet place of wooden houses and sunflower fields. The sign at the edge of the village read Zalesye. The name meant nothing to him. He was sitting on a bench in the village square, watching the children play when he saw her. She was about 9 years old, with blonde hair tied back in a simple braid. She was playing with a group of other girls, her laughter bright and clear. She was happy. She was safe. In her hands she clutched a worn, handmade doll with button eyes. Yuri stared. The doll, the flower, the pieces of a puzzle he did not know he was solving began to click into place. He felt a sudden, sharp ache in the empty space inside him, a pain so intense it almost brought him to his knees. The girl, Anna, looked up. Her eyes met his. She did not recognize him. He was just a strange, old man sitting on a bench. But she offered him a small, shy smile. And in that moment, something shifted in the barren landscape of Yuri's soul. The black heart had taken his memory, the ghost of his daughter. It had erased the why, but it could not erase the what. It could not erase the act itself, the journey, the sacrifice, the choice. The memory of saving Anna was not his. It belonged to the man he used to be. But the consequence of that act, this happy, living child, was real. She was the echo of his lost humanity. He did not know love, he did not know grief, but as he looked at the girl he felt a flicker of something new, a quiet, profound resonance, not the dissonant song of the rust but a simpler, cleaner note, purpose. He had no past, he had no future, but he had this. He could stay here on the edge of the world and watch. He could be a silent, unknown guardian. He could ensure that at least one flower saved from the zone's cold heart was allowed to grow in the sun. It was not a life, but it was enough. Chapter 17. The Whispers of Rust. The world ended on a Tuesday. It did not end with a bang or a whimper, but with a soft, melodic hum that rose from the earth itself. In the lumber camp far to the east, the loggers' chainsaws and axes began to corrode in their hands, the metal singing a single, high-pitched note before crumbling to dust. The men themselves stopped, their eyes glazing over as a faint, reddish tracery appeared on their skin. They turned as one and began to walk west. In the city of Odessa, the great container ships in the harbor groaned as their hulls began to resonate, the rust spreading in beautiful, fractal patterns. The dock workers, Pavel's son among them, dropped their tools, their faces becoming blank and serene. They too began to walk east. All across the country, then the continent, the phenomenon spread. It was not a plague. It was a broadcast. Anything made of iron, anything decaying, anything that held the memory of entropy became an antenna for a new song. And anyone who had ever felt loss or grief or despair, which was to say everyone, was a receiver. The song was not one of death. It was one of harmony. It promised an end to pain, to memory, to the friction of being human. It promised unity, a grand, final symphony. In Zailsai, the villagers heard it too. They stumbled out of their homes, their eyes vacant, drawn by the beautiful music coming from the old church bell, the rusted tractors, the nails in their own walls. They began to drift towards the road, towards the zone. Yuri was sitting on his bench when it began. He heard the hum, saw the villagers' strange, placid smiles, but he felt nothing. The song was for those with ghosts, with memories to surrender. He was hollow. He was immune. He saw Anna come out of her house, her face as blank as the others. She began to walk, following her parents into the slow, shuffling procession. And Yuri moved. He ran, his prosthetic leg pounding on the dusty ground. He pushed through the compliant, placid villagers until he reached her. He grabbed her arm. "Lana," he shouted. She looked at him, but her eyes were empty. She did not see him. She only heard the music. She tried to pull away, to rejoin the flow. He knew he could not stop them all. The world was succumbing to a beautiful, melodic apocalypse. The symphony of rust had found a new maestro, or perhaps the old one had simply become the song itself. The doctor, in his own mad way, had been a prophet. He had wanted to become the mind of the zone, but the zone had no mind. It only had a voice, and now it was singing. Yuri looked at Anna's empty face, then at the doll she still clutched in her hand. The cloth was worn, the button eyes loose. The doll was a memory, his last link to the man he had been. He made a choice, not a calculation of risk, not a strategic maneuver, a simple human choice. He could not save the world, but he could save her. He lifted her into his arms. She was heavier now, but he was still strong. He turned his back on the procession of the damned and began to run, not away from the zone, but parallel to it, along its border. He did not know where he was going. He was just running. As he ran, he felt a strange, familiar ache begin to grow in the empty space within him. A phantom pain, and with the pain came a faint, ghostly echo, a memory trying to be born, the sound of a little girl's laughter like wind chimes in a forgotten garden. The black heart had taken his memory, but the zone gives nothing for free and takes nothing forever. It only changes things. His sacrifice had hollowed him out, made him immune to the song. But Anna, the living consequence of that sacrifice, was now a key, a way to unlock the room he had sealed away. He did not know if they would survive. He did not know if there was a world left to survive in. But as he ran, with the girl in his arms and the world ending behind him, Yuri Kovalenko felt the first, painful, beautiful flicker of his own returning ghost. The symphony of rust was rising, but in the heart of one hollow man, a single, defiant human note was beginning to play, and it was a song of hope. Chapter 18. The Last Dissonant Note. Yuri ran. He ran until his lungs burned and his prosthetic legs screamed in protest. The world around him was succumbing to a beautiful, terrifying peace. The symphony of rust was not a wave of destruction, but of conversion. The trees, their leaves tinged with the reddish-brown of autumn, seemed to hum in harmony. The wind, once a mournful sigh, now carried a clear, melodic note. The very planet was learning a new song. The procession of villagers, Anna's parents among them, did not chase him. They simply continued their slow, inexorable march towards the zone, their faces placid, their movements synchronized. They were no longer individuals. They were notes in a global chorus. He carried Anna, a warm, living weight in his arms. She was quiet, her eyes open but unseeing, lost in the universal melody. He could feel the faint vibration of the song in her small body. She was being tuned, slowly and surely, to the zone's frequency. He knew with a certainty that went deeper than logic that running away was futile. The symphony was not a localized phenomenon. It was the new sound of reality. There was nowhere on earth to run to. There was only one place that mattered, the source, the conductor's podium. He stopped, his breath ragged. He looked north, towards the faint, ominous glow that had haunted the horizon for 30 years. Pripyat, the reactor. His new purpose was a desperate, insane gamble. He could not fight the symphony. He could not outrun it. But perhaps he could shield one person from it. To do that, he had to take her not away from the heart of the storm, but directly into it. He began the long walk back into the maw of the beast that had taken everything from him, twice. The journey was a pilgrimage in reverse. As he drew closer, the symphony grew in power and complexity. It was no longer a single note, but a billion-layered harmony of breathtaking beauty. It spoke of an end to struggle, an end to memory, an end to the terrible burden of being a single, separate soul. It was the most seductive promise he had ever heard. And as the symphony grew stronger, so did the ache in his soul. The echo of his lost memory, awakened by Anna's presence, began to resolve. Flashes of it returned, sharp and painful. A little girl's hand in his, the smell of birthday cake, the sound of a laugh that could shatter a man's heart. The returning memory was a double-edged sword. It was the source of his new, defiant humanity, the reason he could resist the song's pull. But it also made him vulnerable. It gave the symphony something to latch onto. He could feel it probing at his grief, offering to soothe it, to dissolve it into the greater whole. The very thing that allowed him to save Anna was the thing that was damning him. He walked through the red forest. The pine trees, long dead and colored a deep, angry red, vibrated with a powerful, resonant hum. He walked the dead streets of Pripyat, past the silent Ferris wheel, which now glowed with a soft, internal light, each of its cabins a lantern of harmonic energy. He finally stood before it, the new safe confinement, the great arching structure that entombed the ruins of Reactor 4. It was from here that the symphony poured. The air around it shimmered with visible waves of sound and light. It was not a place of death anymore. It was the choir hall for a new world. He walked up to the edge of the exclusion perimeter around the structure. The energy was so intense here it felt like standing in the heart of a ringing bell. Anna began to stir in his arms, her body vibrating more intensely. He was losing her. He held her close, pressing her head against his chest. He closed his eyes and did something he had not done in 30 years. He stopped fighting the memory of his daughter. He let it come. He embraced it in all its terrible, beautiful detail. Lena in the sunlit room holding the wooden bird, her laugh. He let the love and the grief wash over him, a torrent of pure, undiluted humanity. He had sacrificed this memory to save his life. Now he would wield it to save another. The symphony surged, sensing his pain, sensing his grief. It washed over him, trying to claim him, to dissolve him. But this time, Yuri did not shield himself. He took the memory, the most powerful and defining moment of his existence, and he gave it away. He projected it, not with the psychic violence he and Pavel had used against the sleepers, but with a quiet, desperate love. He pushed the memory of Lena's laughter, of a father's love, into Anna's mind. He used it as an anchor, a single, perfect, individual note to counter the universal chorus. He was not erasing the symphony. He was teaching Anna a different song. This is what it is to be one person, he thought, pouring all of himself into the girl. This is the pain and the joy of it. Remember this. Remember for me. He felt the memory leave him, but this time it was not torn away by a cold void. It was given freely, and in the giving it changed. It was no longer the ghost of a tragic loss. It became a legacy, a seed. Anna gasped, a sharp intake of breath. Her eyes, which had been vacant, focused. They looked up at him, filled with a child's confusion, but they were her own. The blank placidity was gone. She was an individual again. The symphony still washed over her, but it could not find purchase. She was anchored to a memory that was not her own. She was shielded by a stranger's love. Yuri felt a profound change within himself. The hole in his soul was not gone, but it was not empty anymore. It was filled with the quiet, warm resonance of his sacrifice. He was no longer a hollow man. He was defined not by what he had lost, but by what he had given away. He stood there holding the girl at the epicenter of a transformed world. The symphony of rust continued its song, a beautiful and eternal hymn. The human race was gone, absorbed into a single, peaceful consciousness. There would be no more war, no more pain, no more art, no more love. But in the heart of the zone, at the foot of a dead reactor, stood a man who remembered what it was to be a father, and a girl who was protected by a love that was not meant for her. They were the last two people on Earth, a single, stubborn, dissonant note in a world of perfect, terrible harmony. They were a testament to the fact that even when everything is lost, a choice can still be made. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. The end.